Hello once more, folks. It's me, the Hearth Guy, and welcome to this compilation of my tour guide to the Holds of Skyrim. With this, I've officially covered everything I reasonably can. Except Solstheim, I guess. But that's enough to be a whole other thing, and I'd like to save some one-off tour guide ideas for a rainy day. That said, I've enjoyed the last 3 months or so of re-exploring the places of Skyrim, rather than just the people. Considering how often we run from point A to point B in Skyrim, maybe you're overdue a brief summary of the places all your choices directly influence. If you've ever thought about that, then this is the place to be. So not to waste any time with preamble, sit back and relax as we take a nice long tour through the great province of Skyrim, and the 9 holds that make it up. Yo, we back in the Elder Scrolls mines now! Hope you packed your cheese and steel swords, cause we're still in Skyrim. Hey there, the Hearth Guy here. And chances are we don't need too much of an introduction. If you've seen my last few Skyrim videos, then you should have an idea of who I am. But to cover my bases, sup? I like rambling incoherently about fictional locations and factions, and since I realized I did a lot of yapping about the people in Skyrim and not Skyrim itself, I decided to change that. For calling these series tour guides, we haven't actually done a lot of sightseeing, have we? So let's change that with this trip into the province of Skyrim, by properly detailing the landscapes, peoples, and sights of Skyrim's holds. Before, I went on and on about the people and groups within Skyrim, but less about the country itself, which was perhaps a bit of an oversight. I did give brief summaries, when necessary, but these holds are worth a proper look on their own. Each gives a small glimpse into the world we've all been enamored and stuck with for the better part of 15 years. So since Elder Scrolls 6 is sure to disappoint us even if it arrives in this lifetime, might as well enjoy what we've got now. So come along with me on this, for once accurately named tour guide to the holds of Skyrim. Starting with... Have I ever told you how much I hate the cold? Like, truly, genuinely hate the cold. If I was put into a room with Elenwyn, Delphine, and the Cold Miser and a gun with 3 bullets, I'm shooting Elenwyn 3 times, throwing Delphine through the nearest window, and then strangling the Cold Miser with my bare hands. As you can guess, I have strong feelings about the temperature. So you can also guess how it is I'll feel about the coldest, most run-down corner of Skyrim that has the audacity to call itself a hold. Winterhold is that one old guy who is somehow clinging to life off of spite alone. But I'll be fair and I will check my biases here. I am not a fan of Winterhold or its capital, Winterhold, or its college, of Winterhold. But this remains a guide to the region, so I have to start with its most distinguishing locations, the aforementioned capital and college. I will attempt neutrality. The college and city I have covered before, but we can go over them once more. Located on an elevated ice shelf overlooking the Sea of Ghosts are the decrepit remains of the city of Winterhold and its college. Once a center of learning and culture, Winterhold was the capital of Skyrim for a long stretch back when it was large enough to warrant such a title, and back when the Nords still respected the magic which the college was founded on. It even saw multiple periods of growth spurred on by the college's own expansion. Though its exact moment of founding is unknown, considering its location in the Old Holds, where the Nordic ancestors the Atmorans first settled Skyrim, it's likely quite ancient. Taking into account the nearby ruins of Sarthal, the first Atmoran settlement in Skyrim, it can be assumed that Sarthal's destruction at the hands of the Snow Elves led to resettlement nearby eventually, hence Winterhold's placement today. However, again, the actual founding of the city is unknown, though it's often attributed to the Archmage Shalador. But that story is put alongside various myths, so it's hard to be sure if it's the truth. As you can probably tell, it's almost impossible to separate the city and its college, even from a historical standpoint. And yet in the 4th era, where we last saw them, the two are at constant odds. Nords have forgotten their reverence for magic save for restoration and the art of the voice, and the college has become increasingly reclusive in its own right. This is in no small part because of the Great Collapse, which you can't go 5 minutes without hearing about when you're in Winterhold. It's blamed on the college, Red Mountain erupting a century prior, and all sorts of other nonsense that hasn't and may never be confirmed, so here's the rundown. One day, an intense series of storms crashed into Winterhold over and over, culminating in an earthquake that saw most of the city slide off into the ocean below. Winterhold as an entity collapsed right along with the rest of the city, and the college got blamed by the survivors. Fast forward about 80 years, and we're at the time of the Elder Scrolls V, and Winterhold has only gotten worse. Most that survived moved away, and those that are left eke out a meager living off the scraps that remain. Even the college, physically untouched by the collapse, was heavily affected by the damaged infrastructure and an air of suspicion cast over it, leading to mass exodus of its members and factionalism within its ranks. All of this and more I discussed in depth in another video, so if you want to know more about all of that, then go watch it. As for the city and its people, Winterhold already was far out of the way from Skyrim's politics ever since the capital moved to Solitude, and places like Eastmarch and the Pale, its neighbors, slowly waned in influence as well. Remarkably, beyond the college, the unfolding of the Civil War has seen Winterhold suddenly gain a modicum of relevance, if only for serving to keep the old holds of Skyrim united, and holding the waters northwest of Windhelm. The current Jarl, Horir, scrambles for an ounce of the influence and power his forefathers once had, but even among the rebellious Jarls who already need as much as they can get, he is irrelevant. It doesn't help that he adamantly hates the college, the only real asset the city has, and maintains only token connections to it. In spite of all of this, Horir's stubbornness can be argued as a positive trait for Winterhold. He wants to regrow Winterhold's influence. He wants it to thrive, just without relying on the college, for the most part. It's not much, but he does allow the college to continue its work as long as it stays out of the way. And based off the Chill, the Hold's prison, being manned by Frost Atronachs, he must have some kind of mutually beneficial arrangement with them. If nothing else, he has to acknowledge their value, otherwise he wouldn't keep Malor Saloth around, because he assumes an elf has some connection to the College of Magic. And before you get up in arms about stereotypes, the Imperial Jarl does the same thing. The only remaining noble of Winterhold is Kraldar, and he is named Jarl if Horir is kicked out of the city during the Civil War. He's got a lot friendlier of an outlook on the college, but for the most part he doesn't seem to be actively trying to improve on Winterhold's situation the same way Horir is. He seems to think that just by being buddies with the aloof college or the Empire, who's busy trying not to collapse every 5 seconds, that this will somehow restore Winterhold. Yeah, I'm not going to hold my breath on that one. But that's all that can really be said about Winterhold, and I've probably stretched even that to its breaking point. So how about we move our tour outside the Hold capital? Looking past the city and the college, we find little of note in the Hold. As one of the 4 old holds, it's marked with ruins, with Sarthal once again being the most worthy of note. Still, smaller sites show that Winterhold was once quite populated in the early days of Atmoran expansion. It was also densely populated by the Snow Elves and Deep Elves, aka the Dwarves, the latter of which's ruins and artifacts also dot the landscape. There's something poetic about the fact that there are more ruins of Winterhold's glory days than there are actual occupied settlements and homes. I suppose forts could count, although of the 3 forts in the Hold, 2 are actually controlled by the Silver Hand. Curiously, since Driftshade Refuge, the Hand's headquarters, is located here, it stands to reason that the Silver Hand's biggest presence should be in Winterhold. You could even argue that this makes sense, since the Hall of the Vigilant is nearby in the Pale, and the college often deals with similar wayward magical problems. Add the Dawnguard over in the Rift and you start to realize how secure these holds should be from Daedra and other magical dangers. Sure, the Silver Hand can get a bit overzealous with how they go about hunting werebeasts, but seeing as you pretty much never see any in Skyrim, I'd argue that they did their job. Ensuring Winterhold at least is remarkably safe from these types of monsters. That is until you wipe out the Silver Hand in the Companions quest line and the Vigilants get killed off screen for the Dawnguard quest line. Well, it was nice while it lasted. Not all bad, though. Fort Kostav's still operational and over the course of the Civil War gets manned by either side. So even if the hand's not around anymore, at least there's someone that can keep the peace better than the 4 guards that walk around Winterhold. One of which isn't even in the city, since there is one other technical settlement in Winterhold, that being Whistling Mine southwest of the capital. A fairly modest iron mine. It's the main resource Winterhold has to offer that... I'm sorry. I mean had to offer, as the mine dried up some time ago and only scant amounts remain. No matter what the owner may think, unless they happen upon something really valuable, it'll be just another example of Winterhold's immense fall from grace. So, clearly living in Winterhold is a practical joke you play on yourself, but what if you're visiting? What sights beyond what we've already discussed could you hope to see wandering the icy landscape? First is the most famous, the Shrine of Azura. Easily the chillest of the Daedra by a long shot, matron of the Dark Elves and the goddess of twilight, her visage watches over the cold land that Dark Elf refugees first found purchase in following the eruption of the Red Mountain. The Dark Elves in question spread out, at first to the holds of Winterhold and Eastmarch following this. However, the Great Collapse and the raised suspicion of magic saw the Dark Elves of the city once more leave their homes for elsewhere. Other places, not the cat place. Even so, the statue of Azura is respected by just about everyone. Even with the residents of Winterhold despising magic and mistrusting elves especially, no one has dared to make a problem for the statue's lone priestess, or make any moves to destroy it. I can only assume out of either respect for Azura, inconvenience, or maybe the college's influence. Its ruling archmage is a dark elf after all, and it wouldn't surprise me if he or his family came to Winterhold all those years ago too. Another much older site would be Ysgramor's tomb, the final resting place of the king who first settled Skyrim for the Atmorans and is now a place of pilgrimage for the companions, who still carry on his traditions, and any other would-be heroes and leaders that want to pay their respects to the founding father of the Nordic people, and the second greatest elf killer in Tamriel's history. Just behind everyone's favorite time-traveling cyborg, Pellinal Whitestrake. I guarantee if these two got to know each other, they'd have wiped out the Mer from the world long before the Thalmor could make them being born everyone else's problem. In fact, I guarantee if Pellinal had known Wuthrod existed, then he'd have beelined it for Skyrim, and proceeded to ensure that axe went from especially deadly to elves to instantly kills elves within a 100-mile radius off of pure ancestral trauma. But I'm digressing into a whole other point by now. Sorry, I'm just a really big fan of these two, for very wholesome reasons, I assure you. My main point is, if you hate elves, you'll also want to hang around and give respect to one of the great elf haters. Or have a fun time running through his gauntlet of ghost companions. Nords like to fight as a pastime after all. If you step out of the tomb and look around, you'll see more of a natural wonder of sorts. The Sea of Ghosts and the ice fields of Winterhold. Maybe it's just me, but despite my chronic hatred of any temperature below 60, I really like the look of ice in bodies of water. Frozen oceans are a beautiful thing to me, and if you share that thought, then it's hard to go wrong with a little wildlife safari around Tamriel's northernmost waters. Just, don't get too close to the wildlife. It almost all wants to kill you and anything that looks like you. Such is the life for the humble Winterholder. I think that's what you'd call them. Can you tell I'm starting to run out of things to talk about? Not totally out of sights, however, as among the ice you can find a place rather important for Nordic culture. The Serpent Stone. Located on the very creatively named Serpent Stone Island, Nords have been sent here for generations to test their strength against the ice wraiths that flock to the island. Maybe not as impressive when you remember that they're all 50% resistant to frost, but I can't deny that killing a floating snake made of ice and hatred is a pretty good story. Mount Anthor, south of Sarthal, is actually historically relevant too, as further proof that all the cool things about Winterhold happened in its past, as that's the place Olaf One-Eye, unifier of Skyrim, fought and subdued the dragon Numenex, and dragged him back to Whiterun to be imprisoned. I repeat, this is where some dude decided to punch a dragon and make him his pet. Remember Dragon's Reach? Yeah, it's that dragon. And this is where a dragon had all his ancestors and Akatosh himself look down upon him in utter contempt, as not even a dragonborn put him on a leash for the rest of his life. Gotta love the Nords. Anything else of note? I guess there's an unremarkable lighthouse in the eastern mountains of the Hold that is home to let me out, 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 let me out. We don't talk about Frostflow Lighthouse. Nothing there is worth remembering. To close off our little tour guide of Winterhold, I'd like to engage in my favorite pastime. Fan fiction. Speculative history. Or I guess it's a speculative future. Because I want to explain to you how I think Winterhold could actually get itself out of the rut that it's in. And believe it or not, it will include some of the random places I just mentioned. For starters, and this may shock you, they'll have to play nice with the college. Don't have to like the wizards, but having the folks who shoot fireballs and can forcibly import demons on your side is a nice perk. On the other hand, they'll have to move the capital. At this point, there's nothing to be gained from staying where Winterhold used to be. And their best option for a new place to hang out is actually Fort Kastav. Besides being the most built-up location in the hold, it's also closer to the Whistling Mind and Windhelm, both crucial locations for a Stormcloak-controlled Winterhold. It's also closer to Whiterun, the center of Skyrim, which is good for anyone controlling Winterhold. Setting up the Jarl's base of influence here could at least start them off with something resembling infrastructure and defensive capabilities. Then let the college expand into what remains of Winterhold. Admittedly, that might make any locals still around upset, but just give Kraldar control of the place and whoever wants to listen to him. It'll probably work itself out. Making Old Winterhold more openly, magically friendly while controlling the main road into the city would both let the college grow, while giving the Jarl final say on who actually can get to the college. If they do it right, they may even attract Dark Elves seeking a better life out of Windhelm to head up into Old Winterhold and close to the statue of Azura, further bolstering Winterhold's numbers and the college's possible attendance, so long as they actually respect them. As for Kastav itself, focus Whistling Mine more on mining for stone rather than iron, and you could start building up the place pretty quickly, considering how close it is. Plus, with the proximity to Windhelm, they might be able to convince people to come and stay with the promise of work as laborers, miners, and masons. Sure, the Civil War is going on, but reminder, Windhelm's got its fair share of unsatisfied locals that might be willing to do some hard work in exchange for better conditions. Or at least, the promise of better conditions. And if you want to do this after settling the war for either side, all the better. The defensive capabilities of Fort Kastav might be hindered by becoming a settlement, but remember, the Silver Hand is either currently occupying or will have been occupying a couple outposts of their own. The Silver Hand may act like bandits in-game, but their only real target is werewolves. So they're neutral for the most part, and if they've been wiped out, at least those places have seen some upkeep. Move some troops into them and boom, replacement garrison for the hold. Winterhold is already a rather inhospitable place, so I think securing it this way would work for its benefit. You'd be layering its defenses, which could prove effective if the soldiers learn to retreat at the first sign of defeat, moving further into the hold and letting the elements do part of the job for them. And if all else fails, having a friendly relationship with the college could let them retreat all the way to Old Winterhold with new, magical allies ready to defend them from invaders. Even if that's off the table, locations like Serpentstone Isle and the several ruins in the northern icefields could be valuable final strongholds that are especially resistant to incursions from outsiders. It may be out of Winterhold's reach now, seeing as it has such a low population, but given enough time and resources, I can see Winterhold claiming at least an ounce of what it once had. Its best days are surely still in the past, but with the grit and determination Nords are known for, it could at least have a future. With the frigid nightmare of Winterhold done, time to move on to somewhere equally as cold, but a little less depressing, yeah? At least, if you can remember this place. Why would that be a problem? You tell me. Why does the Pale exist? Okay, be so for real with me. Did you actually remember that this place was a hold in Skyrim? I bet you didn't even remember it's called the Pale. Bet all you remembered was Dawnstar. And for the most part, that seems to be how the rest of Skyrim thinks about it. Which is not warranted, to be fair. Because the Pale encompasses more of Skyrim than you would think. Huh? What? Oh, hi. I'm the Hearth Guy, and once again I'm stuck in this Talos-forsaken frigid north of Skyrim to guide you through another one of Skyrim's holds. Still in the old holds, where the Nord's ancestors, the Atmorans, first set up shop, with the Pale. Home of the city of Dawnstar, which continues to lack relevancy no matter how badly Jarl Skald the Elder may wish otherwise. Where it's more populated by all the things that want to kill people than actual people, and yet it somehow is more hospitable than Winterhold. At least this place has trees. A bit of an abrupt start, sure, but that's kind of the way it is with this place. So come along with me as we peruse and ponder on the Pale and its population of pitiable proportions. Starting with how I started the video, the Pale makes up the generous slab of space between Hjalmarch and Hoffingar and Eastmarch and Winterhold, confidently setting itself as the most direct bulwark for the Stormcloaks against the Imperial Legion. Despite that, the Pale doesn't get much notice from pretty much anyone unless absolutely necessary. Instead, all the focus is south of it on Whiterun Hold as the geographical center of Skyrim. You might consider how this could be when, due to the Pale's position, it lets the Stormcloaks control most of Skyrim's coastline, and even cross right past Whiterun if the Stormcloaks wanted to invade the weaker parts of Imperial territory. However, as proven by the Imperial quest A False Start, Dawnstar's chief defensive position of Fort Dunstad is in need of reinforcements. The why, at least to me, seems simple. Look at it. Winterhold is one thing, at least it's out of the way, but the Pale is only marginally better. The land is flat, frozen, and forested, with very sparse bits of temperate land near the southern patch of the hold that is basically in Whiterun territory. It's so close to Whiterun that you can see Whiterun from the Lorius Farm, the southernmost quote-unquote settlement in the region. Within that tundra, there are a high number of threats to your continued existence. Least of all, the Giants, which seem to have the highest presence here, save for maybe Whiterun. Giants don't much like it when you get in their space, and unlike the average Stormcloak, they don't need a catapult to send you to have a face-to-face meeting with the stars. Good luck going around them with, again, how perilous the terrain tends to be. You either walk along the northern shore where it's cold and exposed, or walk through the southern areas which are more populated by giants, and even the occasional ice wraith if the landscape really hates you on a given day. A couple of dragons have made their home in the area too, with those scaly miscreants all coming back from the dead, so it just keeps getting better, doesn't it? I swear I can't walk around this place for more than 5 minutes without something trying to kill me. And what do you get for all your hard work and trouble? A port that is largely irrelevant to a relatively small-scale, landlocked war like this. 2 mines overshadowed by the mines of the Reach that the Imperials already control, and an unhealthy amount of Daedric activity just wafting about the place. More on that in a bit. It's just plainly not worth the trouble it would take to invade it conventionally. Believe it or not, the Pale even used to be worse. If you take that old Travels game called Dawnstar at face value, random demons were just hunting anyone that walked around outside the city walls, and yet the hold was somehow more populated than it is now. Although, maybe those dangers just led to people congregating in the hold capital, which is probably the best place to really start this tour. As mentioned, Dawnstar occupies a couple redundant niches that make it less useful as a war target, but in my humble opinion, sets it up far better than places like Morthal or Winterhold. By comparison, sure, Dawnstar is irrelevant besides having the potential freedom to stop the enemy advance or move your troops through it, but as an actual resident in the city, it would leave you fairly self-sufficient. The regular yields from the 2 mines and modest trade from the docks, at least in peacetime, are what sustained Dawnstar's place as a regional capital as far back as we have records. All that said, as time has passed, that bar has just sunk lower and lower. You know, Dawnstar used to have walls. Yeah, real walls and everything. Otherwise, how would they have kept out all the things about the Pale that seemingly go out of their way to hate them? As you can see, those walls aren't there anymore, as the years ground them away and they were never put back up. This is a metaphorical picture of how Dawnstar as a whole operates. Considering the position of Nightcaller Temple up above Dawnstar, the location of the Dawnstar Sanctuary of the Dark Brotherhood, don't worry about that yet, and that of the nearby lighthouse, it wouldn't surprise me if Dawnstar used to encompass the entire coastline here, but slowly crumbled away as the nearby cities of Solitude and once Winterhold dominated the northern trade routes. The last 80 years following Winterhold's great collapse may have helped Dawnstar, if not for the also recent Great War that gave the whole continent of Tamriel a permanent debuff to the quality of life. And once the Civil War started, it only exacerbated that, as now they're cut off from official Imperial trade. Probably. There is still an open East Empire Company office in Windhelm, which is still a giant question mark to me, but let's put that aside, shall we? The point is that as far as places to live go, Dawnstar is far from Winterhold, but it's clearly in a state of decline and shows no signs of recovering. No matter how the war goes, no matter if Winterhold never recovers, and no matter if a new Jarl gets put in charge, neither Dawnstar nor the Pale itself tend to encourage growth. Also, I should point out the fact that the city is being plagued by nightmares brought on by the Nightcaller Temple and the Skull of Corruption housed inside. Dawnstar's people are not so naturally agitated that the nightmares themselves would cause major problems, but definitely would dissuade anyone from wanting to stay. It only gets worse if the Dark Brotherhood and all their baggage moves into the old Dawnstar Sanctuary. While poetic, because like Dawnstar they are on a slow Sisyphean roll downwards into stagnation, the big obvious black door that is now going to be housing assassins cannot bring anything good. Well, I guess you could argue that the Dark Brotherhood would be beneficial because by making money and spending it locally they'd stimulate the local economy, but seeing as they're on their last leg, they had better hope nobody figures them out. Because I doubt either potential ruler of the city wants the Sithis-worshipping freaks in skin-tight red leather skulking around, deep pockets or not. And before you say anything, no. No, you don't. Get back into the basement, degenerate. Both the temple and the sanctuary are just a sliver of the Daedric nonsense going on around here, although that can be pretty confidently said for almost every hold in Skyrim. At least they have the decency to be subtle about it. In the Pale, you can have a mountain-sized statue to the guy whose invasion of reality ruined the entire setting for pretty much everyone, and no one does anything about it, which is especially rich considering the region houses the Hall of the Vigilant, where the Vigilant of Stendarr go out of their way to deal with Daedric worshippers and influences. Again, allow me to point at the 3 or 4 different Daedric problems lingering around Dawnstar and the Pale. I'm less and less surprised that they got almost wiped out by vampires when they have the awareness of a goldfish, a trait they share with the current Jarl, Skald the Elder, who's so focused on the war that he's ignoring every other problem around him. Dragons? Nah, that's just Talos being mad at us. Kill the Imperials and we'll be fine. Nightmares? Irrelevant. Go kill Imperials if you're so agitated. An ever-increasing tide of supernatural horrors assailing our town in the form of the undead, Daedra, and assassins? I literally do not care. Go murder every man wearing red that you see. I further have concerns about Dawnstar's future leadership. It doesn't look like Skald has any children, and I sincerely doubt he'll be making any soon, leaving the line of succession up in the air. The Civil War shows no one is above putting an unrelated person in charge so long as they have prominence, but besides Brina, the closest option would be one of the mine owners, and I somehow doubt that'd make for a reasonable replacement. I don't normally say this, but the Imperial replacement for the man, Brina, is probably the better ruler on a hold-wide basis. Not that much better. She still has all her problems solved or worsened by the Dragonborn being the Dragonborn, but at least she's not shouting at everyone to go die on the front lines. Of course, if you want a long and healthy life, maybe you shouldn't have lived in the Pale, which is as good a time as any to transition from talking about the capital to talking about the areas beyond its influence. If we want to talk about civilization, then the Pale only has a couple examples already mentioned. Fort Dunstad to the south gets enough traffic and activity to warrant its own tavern, which could be a sign of eventual development into a proper settlement, but that remains to be seen. Unlike the case with Castav and Winterhold, Dawnstar remains prominent enough that there's not really a reason for anyone to start setting up around Dunstad. Also doesn't help that the owner was killed by bandits, but that's like the leading cause of death in Skyrim. Also, we can't forget the Hall of the Vigilant, very close to the fort, but again, they all got killed by vampires. Maybe the remnants that are wandering Skyrim and are hanging out in the Rift will come rebuild, or maybe they'll just merge with the Dawn Guard. Either way, don't expect too much from them now. Traveling south from there, you'll reach the plot of land where Heljarchen Hall can be built, and just south of there, you'll find Lorius Farm. This entire area is actually a rather nice one if you've got the drive and ability. There are 2 giants camps on either side of the Heljarchen Hall's land, and past them on both sides are dragon perches in the Skyborn Altar and Sheerpoint, so maybe you don't want to hang around here for long. Sticking to the roads, however, you'll reach the Nightgate Inn beside Lake Yorgrim, which is probably a safer place to stay than trying your luck anywhere else in the Pale. It's got a lovely view of the Hold's largest lake, and is near Winterhold's Fort Kostov if you're worried about any local dangers. So it's a nice spot for travelers or even fancy tourists to hang out for an extended stay. Nightgate Inn was actually originally supposed to be part of a village called Heljarchen, but the location was scrapped and the name was reused for the home west of the inn. Which is a shame, if you ask me, since actual settlements outside the larger cities are so uncommon. Only the 5 Great Holds get any like that, and it makes the world feel a lot more segmented, for lack of a better word. Like each hold in space has its place and the rules they have to obey. Holds that don't have a major city can't have villages or something like that, which just feels silly. Instead, we've got a lot of wilderness that sort of blends together. I guess if you like the icy forest vibe, then you'll like it plenty, but these woods are where all the things that want you dead live, so sightseeing's not recommended, especially if you take the wrong turn and wind up next to a giant camp. They don't seem as common in the north part of the hold, but that's mostly flat shoreline. Great views of the Sea of Ghost, but just go to Dawnstar for those, it's marginally safer. Also, shout out to Anga's Mill, which I thought was a part of Eastmarch until making this script, which really proves my original point about the Pale being so forgettable that I didn't even know this was their territory. Everything south of Fort Dunstad, it feels like no man's land, which I don't know if that was intentional to show how little presence Dawnstar has, or if they just forgot about it. Now, there could be an interesting story to be told about Dawnstar's negligence leading to the Pale's eventual decline, and how new settlements could form as people left the capital hoping to define their own destiny, or even people moving to the Pale because the Jarl's lack of oversight towards the south of the hold. I bet the Thieves Guild would be happy to have a base of operations where no real authority bothers checking. Then you could present all the dangers and troubles the Pale specifically has that these settlers have to face. Dragons, giants, ice wraiths, and bandits who flock to the region for the same reasons as the settlers. Make the Pale feel like a real frontier that stands out from the likes of Winterhold or Hjalmarch. It would give the Pale something. Anything unique to itself that would weave real character into the landscape that most other holds have. Winterhold sucks, Morthal is haunted, Windhelm is racist, Solitude is elitist, Whiterun is nice, Falkreath is mysterious and you'll probably be murdered in your sleep, Riften is a crime-ridden mess and you'll probably be murdered in your sleep, and Markarth is somehow all of these rolled into one. I love Markarth, but that's for another day. What does Dawnstar have, besides the fact that everyone here wants to be somewhere else? Well, that's what this little thought experiment was for, and because I'm physically incapable of not imagining how mod authors could make this all better. You heard me, lads and lasses. Get to work. As for where this character and story could be found, I mentioned Fort Dunstad briefly, but if we're talking about being outside the Jarl's influence, it might not be the best bet. After all, of anywhere in the hold besides Dawnstar, Dunstad would be the only place his or her influence would reach. The real potential lies in the southern areas of the hold, where places like Nightgate Inn and the Heljarken Hall reside. An inn like the Nightgate, alongside the road, can attract travelers and the wayward in search of a place to stay, and over time may expand if they have nowhere else to go. And more than just a few towns got started just being built up around a large enough property like Heljarken Hall. Just look at Whiterun and Jorvaskr. It's even located near Lorius Farm and a quick walk north to Fort Dunstad. So whether for food or protection, it's a strategically sound spot for people to live. If you do something about the giants and the dragons, but you know. This is all admittedly way into conjecture territory, but the main point stands. The southern parts of the Pale, especially the southeast, avoid a lot of the same problems the rest of the hold suffers from. Better environment, closer to the other trade points, like Windhelm and Whiterun, and plenty of free real estate. If the Pale citizens were to try and turn around its slow descent, it'd be down here. Anga's Mill could also go the way of Riverwood and become a village over time. Its proximity to Windhelm, Fort Kostov, and Nightgate Inn could make it a nexus for all three, and give value to whoever starts making it a place to stay. Honestly, it's the best candidate for settling outside Dawnstar, with its only weakness being that due to being on the road from the west to Windhelm, it lies directly in the path of the Imperial March for the Rebellion. But we're talking about a macro timescale as is, and the Civil War will get settled by the Dragonborn one way or another. So the long term is what matters here. And in the long term, I don't see Dawnstar the city getting better if nothing is done. It'll only keep degrading. I can see, if Dawnstar suffers a bad enough series of events, being consumed by its neighbors. Winterhold avoids it through lack of worth, but the Pale has just enough to warrant Whiterun, Eastmarch, Hjalmarch, and Winterhold itself swooping in should the capital become defunct. The southern portions of the hold are already so far away that at most you may see a single guard or soldier patrolling the roads by chance. and a spot like Anga's Mill will likely defer to Windhelm's protection over Dawnstar's, or even Winterhold since Fort Kostov is so near. When Winterhold has a better shot at responding to dangers in your territory, you might as well pack it up like a man. Now, realistically, no, I don't expect that to happen. Dawnstar has lasted this long even on the decline, and if the Stormcloaks do win, then that would mean only good things for the Hold. Its proximity to Windhelm and damage dealt to Solitude could lead to Dawnstar's port becoming more valuable. And if Winterhold finally keels over and falls apart, Skald the Elder may get to take that land for himself. I doubt that'll ever happen because Ulfric's a stickler for tradition, and if only for that he'd probably protect Winterhold as one of the old holds. But hey, I'm grasping for some positive future for this place. It's like seeing a deer on the side of the road with no cops in sight. You and I both know how this is going to end. It's just a matter of how quickly you engage the four-wheel drive. Conjures a funny image, though, of Winterhold and Dawnstar just waiting to see which one kicks the bucket first. Regardless of how you cut it, the Pale just kind of takes up space, both in lore and from a meta perspective. Half the time you're in the Hold, you don't even realize it, and the places that do make it clear where you are just make you want to leave after just a short visit. And that's the truth of Dawnstar. Fine for a visit, foul for a stay. I think that about wraps up this tour guide of the Pale, don't you? The least interesting hold in Skyrim, and one that took a lot of focus on my part to keep talking about. No matter who is at the helm, Dawnstar's fate is to exist in the shadow of its betters, while letting the wilderness outside run the Pale as if civilization never came to the land in the first place. But at least I hope I made their agony amusing to look at. It's truly what I do best. At last, we're beyond the pathetic and regrettable lands to the northeast, and we can move on to fairer pastures, to lands we may actually enjoy living in for more than 5 minutes. I know what you're going to say, but I don't care. This place is better than you think, and I'm going to prove it. Long live Ulfric, baby. I think at least once in our lives, every person has to come to terms with the fact that they have been wrong. Probably more than once. I'll freely admit that I'm wrong at least 10 times a day, and often about really stupid things. So I want you, dear viewers, to approach this video with an open mind, as I talk about why a certain hold in Skyrim may be a lot nicer of a place than we all gave it credit for. No, I did not misspell that title. Eastmarch, the hold and heart of the Stormcloak Rebellion, is a much better place than you think. Now I know this place and its inhabitants bring up a lot of powerful emotions. However, and do consider this, I too went into this hold expecting to have to rag on my boys and girls for choosing to even wake up in the morning if this is what they were looking forward to. But as I really sat and thought about it, I came to a different realization. Originally, this video was going to be titled Eastmarch is a Nightmare, an expression of my own mishandled focus of what Eastmarch was, which I previously pictured as just the frozen north that the capital of Windhelm was located on, and the sulphurous volcanic waste in the south, and all the places and people wrapped up in there. But just as I had to realize this was wrong, perhaps I can convince you of Eastmarch's virtues in today's tour guide of Skyrim's holds. Hello, I am the Hearth Guy, and I've made it no secret that I am a Stormcloak. I can see the Imperial perspective, but I hate the Thalmor and find immense joy in lighting Solitude on fire. And at the heart of the Stormcloak Rebellion, both literally and culturally, is Eastmarch, the ancient center of Skyrim from a time well before any empire. After Ysgramor's companions did their best to erase snow elves from existence, they settled down along the White River, of which Ysgramor's son Yingl's tomb was also set. There they built the great city of Windhelm. How did they build Windhelm? Don't worry about it. If you really must know, ask the Aelids how they built their cities. From then on, Windhelm would stand against every conflict and disaster that would strike Skyrim from the Merethic Age into the Fourth Age. As the ancestral heart of the Nords for most of their history, Windhelm speaks to what the Nordic people are at their core: stalwart, rigid, and indestructible. Windhelm would hold sway over the historical Old Holds of Skyrim in every age, most especially now as those holds are unified behind Ulfric's Stormcloak and his bid for independence. And fate is somewhat on his side, because if ever there was a city to base such a tradition-focused movement, it would be Windhelm. Nowhere in Skyrim does the heart of the Nordic culture beat stronger. What remains of it anyway. We have to talk about Windhelm and Eastmarch's people, but to get there we have to understand a bit of cultural history. This will be a bit of a tangent, but I swear it pertains to the topic at hand and frankly to the entire Civil War series of videos I made. See, the culture of those living in Skyrim and those who built Skyrim are two very different things. Over the last 2 centuries, Skyrim and her people have been subject to a steady cultural colonization by the Empire. It's really been happening for longer, but the Fourth Era has seen it accelerate. Their faith was once centered on the old Nordic pantheon following Shor and Kine and similar elder forms of several imperial divines. But by the events of Skyrim, that faith has been heavily syncretized with the Alessian faith of the Nine Divines. Now, not totally, as many would have you believe. They haven't completely thrown off the old ways, with figures like Shor, Alduin, and Sun still holding prevalence in the minds of the Nords. The Greybeards of High Hrothgar follow the way of the Voice in worship of Kine, mother goddess of the Nords, and all Nords revere and respect them, even though they specifically don't worship Kinnereth, the imperial version of her. The Nords dream of Sovngarde, the Hall of Shor, who is the Nordic incarnation of Lorkhan, the patron god of man, whose imperial equivalent, Shezar, is nearly forgotten. And they dread the return of Alduin, who is usually compared to the Alessian chief god Akatosh by the Old Nords. Just by looking at all this, you can tell that at their core, the beliefs of the Empire and the Nords' heritage are diametrically opposed. Some of their gods were the same or similar, but their emphasis was totally off. However, the one thing that unified them was worship of the Empire's founder, Tiber Septim, or Talos, who was as close to Shor reborn as the Imperial doctrine had. In fact, there's no small argument, and I only say that because it's not technically confirmed, that Talos, Tiber Septim, Ysmir, whatever name you want to give him, was the Shezarene, a manifestation of Lorkhan arrived to usher in a new age of men. Now, the nature of Talos is complex and would make even the Emperor from Warhammer 40k look simple by comparison, but the simplest explanation is this. Talos is the combined union of multiple individuals, all of whom likely were Shezarenes, or had some connection to old Nordic powers such as being masters of the voice. The original Talos/Tiber Septim is disputed, and because of the whole soul fusion nonsense, all versions could be true. But the end result is what matters. Talos mantled the divine role that Shor/Lorkhan had left empty with his death as the champion of men. Talos' existence speaks to Nordic values inherently, and so he was easily woven into their own beliefs and superficially tied the Alessian and Nordic faiths closer together. This tie led to the Nords adopting similar religious practices as the strained empire tried to further unify under a shared identity, even with several parts of Skyrim society taking on more imperial qualities with the illusion of success. This superficial connection is, to me, exactly why the rebellion is happening now. Because both sides, Cyrodiil and Skyrim, have fundamentally different understandings of their faiths, despite using many of the same words and names. Talos isn't just a cool guy that we now worship as a god. He fulfills an intrinsic niche in the Nordic way of life that they've lacked whether they knew it or not. A living hero god that represents their own struggles and the power to overcome them, who mirrors their martyred chief god who he had supplanted. When the Empire, at the behest of the Aldmeri Dominion, tried to erase Talos, they did more than just outlaw a god. To the Nords, it would have looked like they were trying to kill the very god of human determination a second time. This whole tangent leads into how the Nords act, especially in the Old Holds which Eastmarch epitomizes. The question of the Civil War is not just whether Skyrim will remain with the Empire. It's whether the people of Skyrim were ever imperial to begin with. And that cognitive dissonance is coming full circle into how the Stormcloak culture acts and, for this tour guide, how Windhelm has become the place that it is. Windhelm, as Old Nordic as a place can be, is a city on the edge, yet remains unmoving. The average Nord here surges with a rebellious spirit for all the reasons I've laid out before you, as well as simpler ones I've touched on in other videos. Pair that with the high population of Dark Elves housed in the city from when Morrowind exploded for a few years, And is it really a surprise how aggressive the Stormcloak capital comes across? Your first introduction is watching an argument between an overly suspicious and outright racist drunk and a jaded and low-key racist stockworker. Yeah, look up what Suvaris here thinks of Argonians, and you'll realize that this is less a one-way hatred and more a competition for who can hide it the best, and the Nords are losing. I'm not here to defend the Nords. I'm here to critique the Mer, because there's a good reason the Argonians are not allowed inside the walls, and trust me, it's not because of the humans. Need I remind you that the Dunmer word for Argonian is farm tool. It's not for their own safety either. It's so the Argonians don't finish what they started. Life in Windhelm is never easy, and to some degree that's how the locals like it. The Nords respect those who can push on despite hardship, and in Windhelm that's just everyday life. And that doesn't just apply to Nords. Look a bit deeper than the harsh words and simmering tensions and you'll notice some things. For starters, for how elf-hating they are portrayed, both by themselves and others, 3 elves own successful businesses in the city and are treated as respected members of society. The White File, Naranya's stall, and the Hlalu farm just outside the city. 2 of those are owned by high elves, mind you, the ones the Nords have an instinctual hatred of. But here they are. Narelian's White File operates in prime real estate in the market, Naranya is a respected vendor on good terms with many of the locals, and Balin Hlalu, a dark elf, is comfortable enough to hire help for his farm and live outside the Grey Quarter. You don't have to like the Stormcloaks, but life in Windhelm's no worse for anyone else who puts in the effort. If you ignore the serial killer. Look, I have to admit that one's not great. The Dragonborn will eventually get that all cleared up, but it's hard to argue that's not a black mark against the city. There's also a band of murderous Altmer thieves too, but the Thieves Guild will also inevitably deal with them with or without the Dragonborn, I would wager. And Windhelm doesn't always have the resources to go around, being the center for a rebellion and all. Orphaned children either slip through the cracks or get sent out to be the problem of Honor Hall Orphanage in Riften. Hey, the title is better than you think. I never claimed it was perfect. Putting that aside for a bit, Windhelm's a bustling place as the heart of the rebellion, and at least for outside threats, it's heavily defended. Ulfric does often have his eyes turned away from the city due to leading a war. But if the Stormcloaks win, then it can easily be assumed he'd have more time to handle those problems. And of course, if you're an Imperial dog, Brunwulf, Ulfric's replacement, also keeps a close eye on Windhelm after the rebellion is quelled. He does flake on some of his promises, however. As for all his niceties, the Argonians stay outside the city, the Grey Quarter doesn't much improve, and he's stuck leading a recently sieged city in despair and mourning over Ulfric's death. Love him or hate him, people adored him, and for a generational figure like him, Brunwulf will be forced to tread lightly as to not be constantly deemed illegitimate by his own populace. But if it's given the attention it needs, Windhelm is a well-fortified, cultured city that is the largest hub in eastern Skyrim, offering a promising life for anyone with the grit to dig in their heels and get it done. But maybe all the complicated social issues and threats of war aren't your style. Well, Eastmarch is home to more than just Windhelm. Just outside the city are a trio of farms, all of which force as much life from the frozen ground as possible to feed the capital, proving that life just outside the walls is possible and profitable. Shortly along the road outside Windhelm, you'll reach Kynesgrove, a much quieter place surrounded by sacred trees of Kyne. Farming and mining here are a lot easier, and barring a singular dragon attack that gets cleared up, it's pretty much devoid of conflict. That simplicity means that unless you've got a job here, most don't stick around. For being the hold of the Stormcloak, simplicity and peace are a welcome change of pace. Although, because of those sacred trees, it's unlikely Kynesgrove will ever be much larger than it is, unless people go out of their ways to build up the land next to it. Kynesgrove may just fade away given enough time, which wouldn't be wildly out of place in Eastmarch. Fort Amol may currently be the Hold's main military garrison, but it used to be stationed next to a town of the same name. But as you can see, that town is no longer. Maybe you could resettle it, but I can't imagine why you would want to. I guess if enough people get sick of Windhelm, they could try shacking up over here. The scenery is nice, and being next to a military outpost is just smart, so maybe if the Dark Elves had added just a few more miles to their pilgrimage, they wouldn't be stuck in the Grey Quarter. More likely, if you were to set up and stay, you'd head for the Mixwater Mill in the southwest of Eastmarch or Darkwater Crossing even further south. Mixwater has a shortage of laborers due to the war, which means space for any travelers who need a break or want to set down roots far from the violence. It's occupied by the mill's owner, Gilfrey, who is happy to offer pay to replenish her lack of workers. Darkwater Crossing is more active and has more of a community, but it's got its own fair share of troubles. The mine is getting its workers sick with a cough, there's a cave infested with Falmer, and it's gotten a bit too much attention during the Civil War, seeing as it was here that Ulfric's company was taken prisoner alongside the Dragonborn in the lead-up to the game's opening moments. Misfortune seems to just cling to this place, and frankly trying to make a town around mine, while historically viable and a habit for the Nords, makes for a high mortality rate. I guess if you're an orc or friendly with them, you can try staying in Narzelbur. Like most orc strongholds, they get left alone by basically everyone, and they have a valuable ebony mine to profit from. But honestly, it's pretty boring here. Don't even have any quests or followers associated with it. So I forgot it was even here until I was researching for the video. We have skirted around a major part of Eastmarch though, haven't we? The Geyser Fields. Right in the middle of Eastmarch, there are the Geyser Fields, where volcanic activity has rendered it mostly devoid of civilization, barring giants and the occasional Haggraven. This, plus Windhelm, was what filled my mind when I first thought of making this video. But having gotten to this point, I realized that it really doesn't matter, does it? The Geyser Fields are noticeable, sure, but all the problems with them are relegated to their bounds. The giants don't tend to exit their range, and save for a couple dragons, which can fly and so boundaries are pointless, the local wildlife isn't running around the settled areas any more than normal. By all means, you don't want to stay here. Even Winterhold seems more hospitable to civilization than anything around here, but if you're attempting to live around 24/7 boiling water that can explode at any moment, odds are you won't be thrown off by the building-sized monsters you have to share the space with. Although a Silver Hand base is situated overlooking the region at Gallows Rock, you would think they'd take issue with the Hagravens especially. Hagravens are practically lycanthropes, and I doubt anyone except the companions cares that the Silver Hand hunt these sorts. So if we assume they actually do what they claim to do, maybe you'd be smart to either join them or at least keep yourself on their side of the valley. Until the Circle kills them for fun, but the Silver Hand exists to die for a mildly forgettable faction storyline, so it comes with the territory. Besides there, however, the natural sights of Eastmarch are impressive. The two roads that skirt around the danger zone are accompanied by gentle wilderness, or as gentle as you'll get in Skyrim, and the prospect of just finding a quiet enough spot to camp out doesn't seem too far-fetched to me. Part of this can probably be attributed to the presence of the Elder Gleam Sanctuary in Eastmarch. Despite it being located underneath the geysers, if its sap can restore life to a dead tree, imagine how its roots must affect the surrounding wildlife. This on top of Kyne's Grove makes it seem like Kyne's blessing fell particularly heavily on this stretch of land, which adds stock to the idea of the ancient Nords really being in her favor. Even millennia passed when she first blessed them with the power and knowledge to overtake their draconic overlords, the mother goddess of the Nords' presence remains in the very land where what became Skyrim started. Maybe a bit too much, considering how wild Eastmarch remains in the Fourth Era. Some part of that may be why Eastmarch struck me as better than I first imagined. Because when you aren't knee-deep in sulphurous water or the race wars in Windhelm, the landscape of Eastmarch and the people within are remarkably straightforward. No magical nonsense or unusually high amount of Daedra, just people doing their best with a scuffed hand. In spite of the war that defines life for every Eastmarcher, it isn't too hard to forget all about that just from taking a good long stroll around the roads and through the woods. So are there any ways I could imagine improving upon this hold, like I did the last two? Sure, although these will be mostly superficial. Besides the obvious, Eastmarch isn't struggling anywhere near as much as Winterhold or Dawnstar. What I'm offering are more of a pair of outcomes dependent on the ending of the Civil War, as that'll impact Eastmarch more than any other hold. First, the bad ending for Eastmarch. Imperial victory. Windhelm suffers war on its doorsteps, Ulfric is dead, the people are depressed, and the old holds are no doubt penalized for rebelling. I can see people beginning to leave Windhelm, if not Eastmarch entirely, following all of that. And some are considering it in-game like the city blacksmith. For the hold's sake, maybe they scatter around the region and fill out older settlements, or maybe even build new ones, decentralizing the population. This could have two effects. It could lessen the strain on Windhelm and give Brunwulf more leeway to see his own vision for Windhelm happen, or it could weaken his influence over his own people as a whole as they distance themselves from direct rule. Better than having the whole city revolt again, if you ask me, but puts Eastmarch in a weaker position than it was. And then the great ending for Eastmarch. Ulfric becomes High King and Windhelm becomes capital of Skyrim yet again. All of the old holds would suddenly find themselves as the political might behind the newly independent Skyrim, and Windhelm's population would likely soar as more money, soldiers, and politics get involved. Windhelm could, at this rate, expand and free up space for everyone. Honestly, either outcome would, in my opinion, see the aggression between groups lessen as there's no longer a war putting everyone on edge. Portamole would become a military town again, Mixedwater Mill and Darkwater Crossing would be in high demand and could rake in the gold. And that sort of necessary military presence would soothe any worries about the dangers of the region. I could even see them moving into several of the cleared-out forts littering the hold, following the Dragonborn's divinely ordained massacre of every bandit in the country. Just about all the benefits you can imagine from Windhelm being the new capital of Skyrim would make life in the hold much better. With one caveat. All that traffic could start to have an impact on the nature in Eastmarch, and if the nature is damaged, then Kyne's favor could be damaged along with it. Windhelm is in the snowy bits, though, so maybe it won't be that big of a deal. Oh, and before I forget to mention, 50-50 odds the Dark Elves get kicked out of the city. At least the ones behind the walls. I think tensions could cool following victory and everyone being in a generally better mood, but resentment is the kind of thing that lingers. If the city does expand and people of multiple races start populating the streets, the pendulum could swing hard in either direction. But as this video taught me, the Nords of Windhelm don't like half measures. Whatever way it goes, it'll be all or nothing. Straightforward, rigid, and harsh. Just like their home. But I think that's enough on Eastmarch, don't you? I walked in, got called a loser, got called poor, got arrested, all within an afternoon. Man, you can't do anything in Riften. I can't even murder this rich lady who threatened to send the Dark Brotherhood after me, which, by this point, is threatening to send myself after myself. But it's about the principle. 0 out of 10. I love it. Not many places in Skyrim can claim to be totally safe or peaceful, as the land itself is practically purpose-built to kill everyone in it. The north is frozen and hard to cultivate, the west is marked by bandits and conflict, the east is chaotic and the target for imperial might, the center is eyed by all sides, but in the southeastern corner of the province there is one place that is distinctly separated from the troubles of the land. War can come to it, sure, but only lightly, and the same struggles most Nords handle are absent here. It's an autumnal oasis in the rugged country, and so it's really no surprise that everyone actually living there is determined to make it suck as hard as possible. Hello, I am the Hearth Guy, back at it again as your tour guide to the holds of Skyrim. We've taken a trip to each of the old holds so far, and now only one remains, the Rift. Here we can find a territory that's quite distinct compared to its sibling holds. Although it too values the traditions of old Skyrim, their place as a primary trading hub and gateway to the rest of Tamriel has led to a divergence in population and local customs. These differences are unlike almost anywhere else in Skyrim, and along with the exceptional geographic and temperate ecosystems, makes the Rifted arguably the best place to live, as long as you avoid Riften like the plague. But we'll get to that. To start, let's actually get a look at the Rift, shall we? Crossing down past Eastmarch and up the cliffs of an impressive plateau, you reach the thriving breadbasket of the old holds and the rebellion. Lush forests and natural defenses from outside threats makes the Rift a perfect place to settle, and the original Nords and the Atmorans who preceded them agreed, as the Rift has remained consistently settled for just about as long as Eastmarch and Winterhold have been. It's never threatened to overtake them in authority, but they've never had to, since the Rift's strength is in its separation from its neighbors and proximity to Morrowind. Once, Riften served as the linchpin of trade between the two provinces, opening the people to influences beyond Skyrim's borders and making the Dunmer far more prevalent even before the eruption of the Red Mountain. Furthermore, Riften's rich land and bountiful lakes and rivers led to a thriving fishing industry, along with the export of other luxury products such as mead. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, of course. This is still Skyrim. They've suffered Akaviri invasion, undead, and Reachmen deciding to spread the agony of their homeland beyond their borders. Even had a Jarl whose son became a vampire, which he locked up in a heavily guarded fortress in the mountains, where the guards then killed him. I'm sure this place, called Fort Dawnguard, will never again have any prominence. Besides these random bouts of Tamriel being itself, Riften and the Rift by extension remained largely prosperous between all eras. However, Riften's prosperity would waver in the year 98 of the Fourth Era. The Jarl was assassinated, and replaced with Hoskan Crossed Daggers, who definitely, had his predecessor killed and proceeded to be every stereotype of a bad ruler/noble in history, until the people of the Rift rose up and burned his castle down with him still in it. The 40 years or so he was in charge left their mark, however, as brutal taxes and cruel treatment from his soldiers scarred Riften and its people. Also didn't help that the fire they set torched the rest of the city. Even now, over 80 years later, Riften hasn't recovered to what it once was. This quick background explains part of the reason Riften is the way it is, despite what should be a valuable position. Besides being in rebellion and its main neighbor Morrowind being in a perpetual state of gasping for air, that slump following Hosgun's reign left it open to corruption and, at one point, a surge of the Thieves' Guild stationed in the Rift. Nowadays, that guild is also in a slump, but their heyday led to Riften's own degradation. Which at last gets us to talking about Riften in the current day, ruled by Layla Lawgiver, and providing invaluable resources to the Stormcloak cause, while the city slinks into a mire of cynicism and exploitation. Even as the population of the city grows from fools looking to make it rich or leave the country life behind, all Riften today promises those newcomers is a life of drudgery if they're lucky, and a life in the sunless Ratway if they aren't. But speaking of the Ratway, let's start there, shall we? We can only go up, right? The extensive tunnels of Riften sewers are a den of the criminal and the maddened. For those who have no place left in Riften, the skilled find work for the Thieves' Guild that mostly controls the upper levels, at least when they want to. But deeper into the Ratway can only be found the bottom dregs of society. And being so far out of sight, there's never any real assurance what you'll find down there. Former blades, cannibals, a guy who just really likes punching things, all cast below the feet of the normal citizenry. The Thieves' Guild call their ragged flagon a city under the city, and if so, then I suppose that makes all of this the slums. Decent folk don't make a habit of staying in the Ratway, nor those who want to avoid being stabbed. If you find yourself here, you're either a criminal, need to disappear, or made some very questionable life choices. Exiting the Ratway, the lower decks of Riften are moderately better than where you just exited, where at least you don't have to worry about being shanked as you're asleep. Not a lot of free real estate, mind you, and the places you could own are basically a cellar that was given a door. But hey, improvements nonetheless. The homeless of the city that aren't the desperate also live on this level of Riften. This level gives access to the lake and smaller boats to enter the canals, but besides that, there's not too much to discuss. So let's finally talk about Riften properly. Riften is built around the central market, and just about every important landmark can be seen from here. Mistvale Keep, the Temple of Mara, which houses the Hall of the Dead, the Bee and Barv Tavern and Inn, Honor Hall Orphanage, and so on. Most of these don't need too much of an extra explanation. Mistvale is the Jarl's house, the Temple of Mara is where you get married and houses the Hall of the Dead, again. Honor Hall is where you murder the owner so you can adopt some children, all that jazz. All of this makes Riften a very busy place, and it makes sense how the corruption could swell to the degree that it does when Skyrim takes place. Just beyond the western wall is the docks and fishery, where Riften's primary commodities are collected and prepared for transport. As the second largest freshwater lake in Skyrim, only beaten out by Lake Ilonulta in Falkreath, Lake Honrich is just another natural resource which has kept Riften's economy and value moving steadily upwards even in the harshest of times. Not just fish passes through the area though, as connected to it is the Blackbriar Meadery, where Skyrim's most famous and popular drink is made and continues to line the pockets of the titular Maven Blackbriar. Maven here is an example of why making an NPC essential is a blight upon my happiness, because even if I'm going to quick save anyway, I need the satisfaction of turning her cranium into dust. Pretty much everything bad about Riften loops back to her. Even if she didn't start it, she's connected one way or another. She basically owns the Thieves' Guild at this point. The central island that houses the Golden Glow estate are owned by a man who's in her pocket, mostly. And the guards listen to her more than they listen to the actual Jarl, who's deluded herself into thinking Maven Blackbriar is an upstanding member of society. When Maven is fully prepared to stab her in the back, the nanosecond the Imperials take the city. As an aside, it's a very fun idea to let the Imperials have Riften in the Season Unending quest exclusively, so that Maven can become Jarl and then have it taken away from her. Is this absurdly petty? Yes. Sucks to suck, Maven, I hate you, please die. Riveting content aside, Blackbriar Meadery is easily the linchpin to Riften's market. They've got other things, sure, but nothing nearly as profitable. So I can't lie and say that Maven's entirely wrong to say that Riften needs her, but the reverse is also true. Good luck setting up an operation like this anywhere else. Only Folkreath comes close to the right climate, and it's nowhere nearly as populated. Solitude and Windhelm are directly under their leader's eyes, Markarth gets a terrorist attack every other day and is already in a major family's pocket. And Whiterun has every single weapon in the country pointed at it at any given moment. Take Maven out of Riften and she's not nearly as capable as she lets on. This horrendous style of symbiosis is but the crowning jewel of Riften's tiara of utter garbage. 'Cause, admittedly, Maven is more the biggest example of a common issue. The Jarl's steward is taking bribes, the court wizard can barely remember where she is half the time, the Honor Hall orphanage is run by a witch in all things but magic, and half the city's populace is engaged in crime or general corruption to some degree. So if you're looking for actual stability, the Rift's best options lie outside of Riften. You could try working at one of the nearby farms or starting on your own, but that's basically still in the city. You could also try your luck roughing it in the nearby wilderness. Unlike the places we've covered before, you could theoretically make a life out on the land. And based on what we'll see in a bit, the Hold might even send you a guard or two in defense if you can successfully set up something like a farm. So, credit to Layla where it's due. She does look out for even her most isolated citizens. Still, while every place we've mentioned so far is several degrees worse than here, the Rift's natural wonder does come with hidden dangers. Generally mundane threats like wolves and frostbite spiders openly stalk the forests and will commonly cause havoc on the roads. I know. Wild animals attacking on a Skyrim road? Must be a day that ends with S. But in a place like Winterhold or Eastmarch, you can be somewhat confident that at worst you might run into wolves every so often between cities. But seeing as Riften's nature is active enough that Spriggans regularly manifest, that should be a good sign that the wilderness is especially homicidal. Now it's not as bad as Folkreath, and boy we will get to Folkreath, but a smaller kick in the ribs is a cold comfort. Long story short, if you're gonna take a hike, follow the American self-defense philosophy and arm yourself to the teeth. Also probably take the northern road, it's a smidge less dangerous. But if you do, you might be safe enough to appreciate just how pleasant of a place the Rift can be. No miles of icy nothing or sulfuric plains, just rolling landscapes of eternal amber trees. Most of its best views are better appreciated from a distance, however. The Rift has a high number of caves and a fair share of groves or grottos, but all tend to be inhabited by aggressive wildlife. So instead, just appreciate the sights of the Velothi Mountains to the east, Skyrim's border with Morrowind, or follow the River Treva between Lake Honrich and Lake Gaer. Or Gyre. Gear? Whatever. At least you aren't shoved underground surrounded by bears or something. Directly north is the humble town of Shorestone, home to 2 mines that provide ore for the Hold. The population is mostly unprotected miners, especially since the nearby watchtower was cleared out by Imperials. Somehow. Don't know how you get this far into Stormcloak territory with no one noticing, but let's put that aside. It's impressive enough that Shorestone can have its own set of guards that aren't just Riften guards. In theory, there's good money to be made here, and its location is ideal. Close enough to Riften to confidently get protection, the guards had to come from somewhere, but far enough away not to worry about Riften's internal issues. And with the mine spitting out ebony now, if you ignore the unofficial Skyrim patch trying to gaslight you into thinking it should be an iron mine, Shorestone has the chance to make some big money with that unique ore. Fort Greenwall nearby also keeps the area safe whenever it's operated by actual soldiers anyway. Although one of the mines gets infested with frostbite spiders, so maybe they're not as effective as I thought. Really begs the question what they're paying the Shorestone guards to do. Further to the west, you'll find Iverstead, at the foot of the throat of the world, a logging town that's shrunk in recent years. But if you ignore the fake ghost in the ruins, it just means more free real estate for you, with Iverstead also having its own group of guards. Plus, with pilgrims coming and going to make the trip up to High Hrothgar, there's a chance to monetize on that if you really want. Tourist traps are profitable in real life, no reason they can't be in Skyrim. Ivarstead being in a slump is proof that it has the capacity to grow. And if Riften keeps careening off a cliff, then I can see Ivarstead growing as a consequence. It's got an inn, extra space, cultural significance. Just clear out the ghost, and Ivarstead's pretty free of problems besides the bears. And a local crazy homeless man, but hey, now it's like every other city. Between these two villages, there are a scattered bunch of farms and a mill. And like I said, Riften provides at least some protection to most of these places, which is very good, because while the natural beauty of the Rift is great, it's home to quite a few natural horrors that are especially prone to just invading civilized places. I mentioned some of this stuff earlier when talking about the natural sites, but sometimes they don't like staying in those natural sites. The Rift has a frankly suspicious number of dragons hanging about, and the bears are so prolific and problematic that Temba from Ivarstead will not only pay you, but marry you for killing 10 of them. But the Rift's northern half isn't the only place worth settling or traveling. At least if you don't want to rely on the Hold's protection. The southeast of the Rift has Fort Dawnguard and, to a lesser extent, a Vigilant of Stendarr outpost at Stendarr's Beacon, which is the only standing hub for the group following their hall's destruction. While they mostly concern themselves with vampires, Daedra, and other supernatural forces, I doubt they'll do nothing if they see some innocents being attacked by bandits or a dragon. This becomes truer should the Dawnguard's presence expand over the course of the DLC. The only area without any military presence is the southwest, where the orc stronghold of Largashbur is situated, and the orcs here are too busy fighting giants and being cursed to deal with local issues. I guess there's Heartwood Mill, which has a single guard present, but unless that one guard is the Doomslayer of Skyrim, I don't think he's soloing all the troubles in the Western Rift. So be wary if you decide to travel to Ivarstead on the southern roads. All things considered, however, life in the Rift isn't so bad. Better off than any of its fellow Old Holds, at least. It's also the one Old Hold I don't expect to be rattled that much no matter who is in charge. The other settlements are disconnected from Riften such that the Imperials being in charge won't change much for them in their day-to-day lives. Ivarstead might even become a more popular place to live, if true Stormcloaks decide to distance themselves from the new seat of regional Imperial control, making Ivarstead's cultural position even more important to those desperate to hold onto it. I don't foresee any versions of events where Riften doesn't get worse, Stormcloak or Imperial, which suggests that something will have to give. Much like how Hosgun could only go so far before the people turned, whether through violence or abandonment, the people of Riften who are victimized will find a way to get what they want. The locals have already pushed back on the Blackbriars regularly. Mule the Lioness has opted to be Riften's personal do-gooder, and it didn't take much for Karliah to sabotage Maven's whole operation 3 times over. Once this starts, then the Thieves Guild will either go down with her or make a clean break, further weakening the Blackbriar stranglehold. Is this all an extended fantasy about how Maven Blackbriar can end up suffering the most? Yes. I repeat. I hate you, Maven Blackbriar. Please die. But seeing as I've used that kindergarten-level phrase twice already, that's probably a good sign to call it a day, no? As we say goodbye to the Old Holds, I reflect on what each of them has shown us. Winterhold was suffocated by what it once was, the Pale by how uncontrollable it is, Eastmarch by its surprising depth, and at last the Rift by the beauty that exists when you look away from that one sore spot. All are marred by long histories, and all hold tightly to who they used to be, even as it slips through their fingers. Where the other regions of Skyrim more firmly reject their heritage or try to stay on the sidelines, the Old Holds will cling to what defined their ancestors even as the walls come tumbling down around them. The overall theme of these regions is decay and desperation, fitting for the home of the rebellion that is desperately fighting to undo the cultural decay Skyrim's undergone for centuries. Half the Old Holds are barely hanging on. One is at the center of half the problems in this province, and the Rift is carrying all 3 of them on its back, Even so, these places forged the residents into the kind who would defy an empire for the love of land and history. A harsh landscape that bred a harsher people. So what can we make of the Rift and its own people? In this case, it's less to do with the land and more those who've abused its bounty, which has shaped the occupants of Riften and the Hold. They've suffered before under corruption and the failures of their leaders, and as opposed to the other Stormcloak holds, know directly what it means to have that kind of leadership. Where thieves can flock to your home with the expectation of easy money. Where one woman who isn't your Jarl can hold all the power and abuse it. Where the beauty surrounding you is undercut by all the evils that people have brought to it. And that'll breed a resentment for authority and apathetic rulers more than anything their sister cities have experienced. TLDR, keep clear of Riften if you can. Little of value can be found there if you want to be an honest, hard-working person. But enjoy the Rift for what it is, if only because its natural-born people are too busy being swindled or downtrodden to notice it. At least Iverstead is nice. Ah. Now this I like. Now if only the forest would stop trying to eat me! Ah, what a beautiful day in Skyrim. The wind flows through the pixelated leaves. Ants crawl on a stump in the exact same pattern as every other ant on every other stump. And I can cross an entire country in roughly 2 in-game days. Nothing could possibly ruin this. Nope. I just wanted to look at the flowers. I'm sorry, what? You know, I'm starting to remember why I don't go to Falkreath. Hello. I am the Hearth Guy, your reluctant tour guide to this particular corner of Skyrim, our first foray into the lands past the ancestral old holds of the Nords, and it's into what might just be the biggest example of geographical catfishing I've ever seen. Because Falkreath Hold, yeah, it's just called that, it's a Winterhold Whiterun situation, is a freaking death trap. It seems rather benign on the surface, but once you realize that even the Pale was less overtly hostile to its locals, then just how awful of a place it is to live becomes revealed. But hey, you're the Dragonborn, so you'll probably be fine. Just ignore the rabid wolves, bandits, undead, sentient trees, actual witches, and, of course, dragons, which all are condensed into this corner of Skyrim in frankly insulting numbers. At least the Pale would distance some of this out. You'll be busy getting assaulted by one thing and then run into 2 more things that equally want you dead. But it's my duty and fiduciary responsibility to be your guide to all of this, so why don't we get right into it? In the southwest corner of Skyrim, bordering Hammerfell and Cyrodiil by the Jarl Mountains, Falkreath has always been the gateway to the north. As such, Imperial influence is stronger than most other holds save Solitude. Despite this, Falkreath is far from metropolitan. Even by Skyrim standards, it's an uncivilized region with a single real settlement in the titular Falkreath. There are solitary cabins out there and a single mill, but everything else is densely packed with pine forests. It seems neither the locals nor Empire really bothered to root themselves into the forest, judged by how the only other settlement, Helgen, was perched up on the eastern mountainside rather than in the lowlands of the Hold where nature is king. Of course, that didn't save Helgen when Alduin decided to start his 3-course meal of reality off with a bang. But what are you gonna do? We'll talk about Helgen later, but as it only exists to get torched, it's hardly a tourist attraction. Instead, if you want to enjoy any of what Falkreath society has to offer, it's entirely located in the city. Falkreath and the land it's built on have changed hands several times in Tamriel's history. Once it was home to a tribe of Minotaurs and a Nordic tribe of men. However, that tribe of men were enslaved by the Aelids to the south, and taken from their homes, and the Minotaurs would be run out later by Nordic settlers, led by Bjarfrud Skjoralmor, the first Jarl of Falkreath. His actual name, by the way. He had fought and repelled the Minotaurs several times before he decided that it was better to just cut down some of the forest and build a town as a permanent stronghold against the wilds. From then on, Falkreath was the dominant power over the lands connecting Skyrim to Cyrodiil, especially the Colovian region directly to its south, which is important since the Colovians would at one point take control of Falkreath following the Alessian Empire's collapse and the formation of the independent Colovian estates. Falkreath would be generally mistreated by their southern overlords until the rise of the Second Empire under Riemann Cyrodiil. that guy who gave the country its name, at one of the many important battles tied to Falkreath's history, the Battle of Pale Pass, where Riemann battled the Akaviri who had invaded the province. Considering what we call that funny place in the middle of Tamriel, you can guess who won. But Falkreath had suffered a lot in this time, and it garnered a reputation surrounding death and battles. And it was only about to get worse, cause when the empire Riemann built did that thing all Cyrodiilic empires did and blew up, Falkreath started getting just utterly violated. For the next 100 years or so, it would be the site of battle after battle, crisis after crisis. It was a part of the western kingdom of Skyrim during that era's civil war. It got invaded and almost entirely occupied by orcs, got re-invaded by orcs a century later, and was caught between a coven of witches and an imperial legion fighting each other. If you're wondering how that happened, somehow a bunch of Reachmen decided to become emperors of Cyrodiil for a while, and as can be expected with Reachmen, they came with witches as advisors. How anyone saw this and allowed it for more than 5 minutes, I have no idea, but that's not important right now. The final point of this roughly 150 years of continuous crotch shots was when Falkreath got jumped from all sides by Reachmen allied with Minotaurs. Because at this point, why wouldn't they do that? Once the Third Empire rolled around, things finally settled down for Falkreath. Mostly. They took part in the War of the Red Diamond on the side of the Wolf Queen Potema, and they, like everyone, got biblically rocked by Maroon's Dagon trying to one-up Molag Bal for the best invasion of reality. But for the most part, Falkreath's time in the Third Era was peaceful. And this would persist until the Civil War, as Skyrim never saw action during the Great War, and this has perhaps led to the state of affairs in the capital. Besides all that prior death making Falkreath have the most famous and largest graveyard in Skyrim, the people of Falkreath have taken that reputation as almost a mark of pride, probably because they have a few centuries of separation from all of it. Can't imagine the people who had to live through their life being a game of Russian roulette would find it all that funny to name the tavern after the fact that the city has more dead people than your average Nordic barrow. That relative peace and the reopening of the Pale Pass as a way to get from Skyrim to Cyrodiil has let the Empire do what it does best to Skyrim, and that's try and make it less like Skyrim. And it's worked pretty well in Falkreath. The current Jarl, Siggeir, is an utterly insufferable imbecile that I am happy to unseat, and is reason enough to join the Stormcloaks just so his stupid face gets shoved into the basement somewhere. He's also huffing the Empire's fumes every chance he gets because they let him be in charge of the city, and keep wasting his time and money on food, clothes, and hiring bandits to rob his own people so that he can get a cut while his steward does all the actual work. A real stand-up guy, that one. You might think I'm exaggerating or being biased towards the Stormcloaks and just don't like him because he's an Imperial Jarl. He unironically supports the Thalmor. I think that proves my point. The former and possibly future Jarl Dengeir, Siggeir's uncle, is better that he actually is doing the job himself. But the man has no heirs himself and is so old he might as well be speaking at Morin. Besides just eventual death, he's gotten paranoid since he was forced out of power by Siggeir and the Imperials, which could be worse if he was in charge of a larger hold, but as things stand, it's probably just makes him stressful to work with. Siggeir's honestly the worst of it, as the rest of Falkreath couldn't seem to care less about the Empire save for maybe Laud, and that's only if you believe Dengeir's suspicions about him, which turn out to be false. I mean, there's an ex-Stormcloak running a business in town, and no one says or does anything, so they aren't the most proactive Imperial supporters. And to be fair, Falkreath has remained as far from the Civil War action as you can get. It's surrounded on all sides, save for 2 slim sections by mountains connected to the one neutral part of the province, and Falkreath is nestled into the southern corner away from the roads exiting the region. The only reason anything happened in Helgen was because Sky Satan descended to kickstart the plot. What happens in Falkreath tends to stay in Falkreath. It's been quiet enough that the Dark Brotherhood Sanctuary has been unnoticed by the locals even though it's practically on their doorstep. Sure, the door is a bit hidden, but it's still right next to a hold capital. You'd expect someone to ask questions, but no. Only when the Brotherhood goes after the Emperor himself does anybody look 5 feet to the right to where a third of Falkreath's population is hanging out. That's not a joke, by the way. There's around 30 NPCs in Falkreath, and 10 of them are in the Dark Brotherhood. I could argue that's bad writing, or you can say Falkreath locals are just so used to the dark and shady things happening in the forest that they don't question it. And I kinda lean more to the latter. because whenever you really look at what the city is surrounded by, you start to realize just how horrifying Falkreath Hold really is for anyone outside the walls. Circling back a bit to Helgen, because if you had to choose somewhere to live in Falkreath or even Skyrim, Helgen was a pretty great place. It was high up in the mountains east of Falkreath, away from the worst the Pine Forest had to offer, and providing an eye on the surrounding area. Based on what little we see before and after, Helgen was likely a fortress town, built around the military fortifications that are clearly older than the town. It's definitely more secure than Falkreath, and had it remained, it could have grown to outshine the capital one day. Personally, I think it would have been nice to have some sort of hint at Helgen rebuilding sometime soon. Most of the key parts of the town are still there, and with several tragedies and troubles in Falkreath, some people could have tried to rebuild in the ashes once Alduin and the dragons were confirmed taken care of after the main quest. After all, Helgen only fell when Alduin decided to start his bender across Skyrim, so the core position of the town is still solid. Not perfect, sure, there's a crew of witches hanging out in the northwest of here at Orphan Rock, but this is still Skyrim and more importantly Falkreath. It'd be too much to ask for a spot of land not to be within spitting distance of some threat on your life. In spite of that, Helgen is one of the best defended settlements in Skyrim outside of Hold Capital, and even then, it outclasses places like Morthal, Winterhold, and Dawnstar. High continuous walls, a sizable barracks, and several watchtowers, it makes sense this is where Tullius chose to drag Ulfric for execution. I doubt the Stormcloaks could have properly attacked it even if they had the time to prepare. In a better life, or maybe a few years later when every institution in Skyrim isn't falling apart at the seams, maybe Helgen could have even grown to replace Falkreath's position as the capital of the Hold, or at least become the more important city. It wouldn't be the first time a regional capital is less important than its subservient neighbor. So hey, when the Dragonborn is done deciding the fate of every person in Skyrim, maybe they can get into real estate. They already own property in every major hold, except Winterhold, but owning land in Winterhold is a net negative experience anyway. They also have so many followers that they could start a village made up of people who all fight the most horrifying dangers Skyrim has to offer on a daily, so why not? There's probably a mod with that premise out there. But enough of the 20% of land that's occupied by people. Falkreath's real defining characteristic is the Pine Forest. And yeah, that's its actual name. Subtlety, thy name is not Skyrim. Falkreath has the claim of being the wildest of all the holds, with these densely forested ranges only having a couple breaks where people live. The most notable being Half Moon Hill, but seeing as that place is occupied by a couple of vampires, I would not suggest stopping for the night. Lakeview Manor can also be built overlooking Lake Ilinalta, the largest freshwater lake in Skyrim, and a site that dominates the north of Falkreath Hold. The White River, which is the freshwater lifeblood for half the province, is fed by Lake Ilinalta, and so control of the lake means theoretically you could exert control to places like Whiterun and Windhelm. However, stories of the lake being cursed are probably to thank for no one trying to do that. Especially not after an imperial fort was built into its shores and sank into the water. Said fort is occupied by necromancers now, so there's a roundabout point to those fears. That fort isn't even the only example of attempts to bring order to the wilds being totally overtaken. Several fortifications dot the Pine Forest, only to be occupied by everything from bandits, which have a suspiciously high population in Falkreath, to Spriggans, which just confirms that the forest hates you personally and wants to throttle you. Which is further confirmed by the number of caves around here whose inhabitants are usually Spriggans with aggravated animals, or are somehow magical in nature. The concerning number of necromancers, vampires, and hagravens in Falkreath makes me curious if kicking out the Minotaurs was the best solution. At least the Minotaurs would just beat you to death. All these other freaks will defile your corpse in some unspeakable way too. Then again, perhaps that was an inevitable quality of Falkreath. The Twilight Sepulchre, the primary temple and focus of power for the Daedric Prince Nocturnal, has been in Falkreath's Pine Forest longer than anyone can remember. Even before the Nords first came here, suggesting these woods were alive with malice long before people tried living in it. Even besides that, a shrine to Clavicus Vile, better known as every Be Careful What You Wish For story jammed into one spiteful god, is casually causing problems, having his better half and vampire followers wander the nearby forests and Gerald Mountains. Which is another thing. The Geralt Mountains. The mountains that separate Cyrodiil from Skyrim so effectively that with the Pale Pass clogged up by avalanches that the Empire can't effectively send troops or trade into Falkreath. And based off the locations found there, I'm not sure it's just because of the mountains. Nordic ruins are one thing. They only become a problem when you walk into them, but a lot of those caves I mentioned are on the sides of the Geralt Mountains. And worse yet, there's at least one confirmed dragon perch southwest of Helgen. And considering Riften's dragon density, I take it the scaly pests just have a love for settling on the most important mountains for traveling out of Skyrim. Sounds like something they'd do. Winged scum. Falkreath is truly a dangerous, terrible place. If only it didn't look so good. I can't deny it. I am a sucker for forests, and Falkreath has one practically alive with atmosphere. Every place I talked about is also one which I regularly get lost in just exploring. Dense pillars of green that stretch out in all directions, often clogged in fog and rain. Soaring peaks with ancient structures that tell of greater days long past. And a single ray of civilization standing firm against it. Like a siren's song, the beauty of Falkreath lures me in even as I am guaranteed something will jump out to kill me every 5 minutes. The Pine Forest especially is one of the most memorable landscapes from Skyrim for me. Alongside Riften's landscape, the Reaches Mountains, and the ice flows of Skyrim's north. Just walking through it reminds me how and why an entire generation have this world lodged so deeply in our minds that it has become a cultural landmark. Which, all things considered, is brilliant for selling what Skyrim and, in this case, Falkreath is. It's supposed to be a wild land which captivates the player into going into the unexplored and dangerous, drawing the player to question what they may find if they dare to try and take a risk and dive into the unknown head first. Perhaps that is what drew the first settlers of Falkreath. They saw the challenge of the wilderness and felt drawn to the mysterious darkness within, and felt they had to try. And for all my words about how this place is a death sentence, they've managed to make it this long. Falkreath has stood in one way or another through numerous empires and dynasties without fail, built on the bodies of the dead. The common Falkreath Nord is a macabre bunch who never take the foul place they live in too seriously, and often find comfort in being so close to the long departed. If the Pine Forest is alive and hates them, then no wonder they find solace near the dead. Nature isn't kind or cruel, it simply is. Like a local deity upon whose whims Falkreath dances to. The forest consumes every scrap of land that they don't fight for. One day it may overtake them and erase whatever trace of them they've built up. But even then, they can find comfort knowing that they'll be among the brave and the defiant who came before. But with a track record of several thousands of years and still going, I suspect Falkreath will be defying the odds well into the future. If we ever get to see it. But let's put that all behind us for the day, yeah? I know I've been harsh recently, and pretty much no hold has been spared some amount of criticism from me. But I think it's time we change that. I think it's time we appreciate a hold that is genuinely the ideal place to live, if you happen to be dropped into Skyrim. A place with gorgeous views, rich culture and history, actually competent leadership, and oh, it's on fire. And there's a dragon. Oh look, werewolves! Such is the life of Jarl Bolgriff of Whiterun. Among Skyrim's holds, there is one that is just better than all the rest, where all the problems and flaws inherent to other holds are absent, where nature isn't actively out to get you and leadership really truly cares about the people. This is, of course, Whiterun. The very image of Skyrim, the heart both metaphorically and geographically. It's where you kill your first dragon, likely get your first house, and probably your first follower. No jokes or betraying expectations. If you had to live somewhere in Skyrim, we all know what's on the top of that list. Greetings, I am the Hearth Guy, your tour guide to Skyrim, and today we're exploring the land and sights of Whiterun Hold. A place I guarantee all of us are extremely familiar with. The plains of Whiterun and its rising districts are so ingrained into the average Skyrim player's head that you could probably find your way through the city blindfolded if you had to. Down the main street and into the market, spot some merchants doing their best to give you audible overload, and the locals being...
district very often? Oh, what am I saying? Of course you don't.
The locals being as friendly as ever. The Gildergleam being a dried stick, the companions probably engaging in blood sport and or being shore-forsaken furries, and Talos's funniest soldier fighting his loudest battles. All overlooked by the Keep of Dragon's Reach, part of Skyrim and a standing monument to when Nords occasionally remember that stunting on dragons is in their blood. Whiterun has so much going for it that it doesn't even make sense to live anywhere else. Especially since the Creation Club added like 3 other places you could live while still being in Whiterun Hold, but that's a whole other topic. Right now, why don't we look a little bit deeper at all that makes Whiterun a mostly wonderful place to live? Starting with the obligatory background info section. Whiterun was founded around Jorrvaskr, the mead hall of the 500 companions of Ysgramor, Skyrim's founding father. However, it wasn't Ysgramor who founded the mead hall, but a man named Jeek of the River, the captain of the ship which became Jorrvaskr's roof and gave it the name. Jeek and his company were drawn in by the wide grassy plains and fertile ground, but stayed because of the presence of the Skyforge, which had been in Skyrim longer than even the elves. The steel forged from it was stronger than average, and so the companions set down roots here to lay claim to it. Most of Skyrim's earliest legends relate to either Eastmarch or Whiterun, and Jeek is usually credited as the first to actually explore the province. This was also the origin of the Greymane family, who has tended to the Skyforge ever since the Atmoran started living around it. The Battleborns also trace themselves back around this time, but their activities and significance are a lot more dubious until modern day. Whiterun's role in Skyrim's history would be rather downplayed until after the Dragon War, likely because the city didn't immediately form around Jorrvaskr and instead slowly built up. Presumably around the time they kicked out the dragons and started worshipping the old Nord gods, the Gildergleam sacred tree of Kine was planted just beside Jorrvaskr, and became the basis for a local temple. Whiterun was just growing without much conflict, which would unceremoniously end with the War of Succession in the early First Era, as several warlords fought for supremacy. At the same time, Whiterun and its neighbors were being harassed by Numenex, one of the remaining dragons. A man named Olaf One-Eye decided that his ancestors clearly didn't humiliate the dragons nearly enough, so he challenged Numenex and beat him into submission, and forced him into a cage of Whiterun's palace, forever giving the castle the name Dragon's Reach, and Olaf became a hero. He also might have been made Jarl, or he might have already been Jarl, but more importantly, he used this as a jumping-off point to start rallying people behind his bid for High King. He united Skyrim for the first time as a renowned hero. Maybe. History is dubious, and a poet of the era claimed Olaf performed some kind of trickery, but the poet was censored by Olaf. It should also be noted that said poet was from Solitude, the city Olaf besieged to finish his conquest of Skyrim, so I highly doubt he was an unbiased source. Doesn't matter, Olaf's dead and in the Hall of Valor, so at least he must have proven himself worthy somehow. But Olaf's funny business is a portent of what's to come for Whiterun, as it gets caught up in conflict and turmoil more than almost any other hold. It makes some amount of sense, seeing as it's the dead center of the province and has so much going for it, but try telling that to any number of peasants whose home got burned down over the years because people keep trying to take it over, or vice versa. I'll not bore you with the details of every major upheaval, but suffice to say that being the heart of Skyrim in almost every way makes a prime environment for all kinds of civil unrest at the best of times. The companions are a whole mess unto themselves, which I've already talked about. Hint hint. There was a weird tidbit about people making a witch into their ruler, and the Greymanes and Battleborns bounce between feuding and being friends seemingly once every era. Whiterun society can get a bit chaotic when left unattended. Don't even get me started on the werewolves who have been hanging around the city for at least a couple hundred years. But all of that's generally in the past, and Whiterun as of the 4th Era is a very chill place. The Greymanes and Battleborns are feuding now because of the Civil War, sure, and the companions are dealing with some problems, but that rarely impacts the everyday citizen. The worst most of them have to fear is the rare dragon attack or the Silver Hand showing up to pick a fight with the companions. And it's honestly astounding how little these people have to fear for their lives when you compare it to other hold capitals. A lot of that can be because of Whiterun's walls and soldiers, but it's all rallied around one man, Balgruuf the Greater, Jarl of Whiterun, and one of the rare examples of a Jarl who exclusively cares about his hold and his people's welfare. Neutrality isn't always a virtue, but it's hard not to like a guy who just wants to be left alone to keep his people safe. He's not perfect. Any look at how 2 of his own children turned out suggests he has some issues, but he's easily in the top 5 Jarls. And on top of a great Jarl, Whiterun's a pretty great city. It's made up of 3 districts, kind of 4 if you want to include the outlying farm areas directly beside it. Those farms aren't super notable though. One is owned by the Battleborns, one is owned by Severio Pelagia, and the other is owned by... the Mistake. Hunningbrew Meadery is also here, and really there's enough space around here to keep putting up buildings if someone really wanted to. Whiterun's in a great position to keep expanding even beyond the walls should it be required. Into Whiterun we find the Plains District, which is the commercial district, with only a couple small houses besides the likes of Warmaiden, Belethor's General Goods, and the Bannered Mare, the center of Whiterun's community. Every night you'll find half the city packed in here hoping to drink and dance their few troubles away. Mostly drinking, this is still the Nords we're talking about. The Drunken Huntsman is here too, but only a few preferred that place over the Mare, and Nazim sleeps in their loft, so I hate it on principle. Up a level in the Wind District, the same level as Jorvaskr and the Temple of Kinnereth, is the residential district of Whiterun. The Greymane and Battleborn estates are located here, along with the majority of the population. Also, Heimskr, if you ever wanted to enjoy the dulcet tones of someone screaming about the best god emperor in fiction, just take a seat right in front of that statue to Talos for a few hours, and soon you'll know Talos better than your own family. The Hall of the Dead is also present, which makes me realize how religious Whiterun really is. Solitude houses the Temple of the Eight, but in Whiterun we have a major temple to Kinnereth right next to a statue to Talos, and a Hall of the Dead dedicated to Arkay, all with Jorvaskr, which normally follows the old Nordic tradition surrounding Shore. Then High Hrothgar is overlooking the Hold, so Whiterun's got a lot of spiritual significance for those who care about that. Finally, above it all is the famed Cloud District, which is dominated by Dragon's Reach. Let's all take a moment to appreciate Nazim being cataclysmically wrong, shall we? Yeah, that felt right. Dragon's Reach doesn't have much to talk about. It's the home of Balgruuf, his 2 mistakes and the good one, about 5 other people not worth talking to, and Irilith. Look, Farengar annoys me, and Provenches is only worth buying a house from. Don't expect me to be too friendly with them. That's the gist of Whiterun, and frankly I'm sure all of you could figure that out. It's Whiterun. Telling a Skyrim player about Whiterun is like explaining to a Halo player who Master Chief is. Like, no kidding, dingus, I know that already. So, how about we get to the other places in Whiterun? Whiterun is a very well-fortified hold, in spite of the plains making for easy armies to march on the city. It has a lot of modern fortifications, what with Fort Greymore and Felglow Keep on opposite sides of the hold. Felglow is occupied by a bunch of morally dubious wizards, but hey, now it's just like the College of Winterhold, which is actually where they came from. Don't know if there would be any political fallout from an institution in a currently rebelling region letting its own rebel faction escape into neutral territory, but I'm just going to assume that no one wants these people here, so it's really a matter of time before someone decides to give them the classic Skyrim eviction notice. Greymore, meanwhile, for once, actually has a lore reason for why it's occupied by bandits. With Whiterun starting off neutral, Balgruuf definitely doesn't have enough troops laying around to bother taking back a heavily fortified location like this. How it got emptied in the first place is hard to say, but let's just chalk it up to the Great War emptying Skyrim of its military-aged men. And to Balgruuf's credit, he didn't totally give up on Whiterun's defenses. The Western Watchtower and White Watch Tower are the first line of defense against attack on either road into Whiterun. With Whiterun's north being a steep mountainside and its south facing more mountains, you have to make it past either of them in order to invade. Although it's clear that the Stormcloaks managed that much whenever they marched on the city. That's understandable though. Unlike with the Imperials, which have Hjalmarch in the way, Windhelm and Eastmarch border Whiterun Hold, and so it can easily muster an army through its comparatively weaker eastern side. I say that since Felglow Keep and the Voltheim Towers, which should be defensive positions for the hold, are under new management, so to speak, suggesting that part of Whiterun has very little guard presence. This changes once one of the regional powers takes control and occupies Greymore, but until then, Balgruuf's working with a slim hand. But even with that slim hand, Balgruuf's got enough of an army to keep a presence in Rorikstead and eventually Riverwood. Both are some of the best settlements in Skyrim if you're planning to hang around or just from a game design standpoint. Riverwood especially boasts its own walls, a tight-knit community, several thriving businesses, and following a part of the main quest, its own little bunch of guards protecting it. I talked about living it up in Whiterun or how nice places like Iverstead are, but it is a crime we never got an official player home in Riverwood. Legitimately, it is the coziest part of Skyrim, the place you're most likely to have your first memories in. You immediately form connections dependent on which of the two NPCs you follow back there, and you even find Delphine there. Okay, maybe it's not all great. But hey, Faendal, the free archery teacher, is here to get absolutely scammed by us, so it balances out. Riverwood's got a lot of potential for growth, and considering how far from any notable dangers that it is, it's prime real estate for folks that want to enjoy nature but don't want to get turned into fertilizer from just living in Falkreath. Or scammed from living in Riften. Unless you're Faendal. Sucks to be Faendal. Moving on to the other settlement of Whiterun, we have Rorikstead, which, look, the community has discussed at length all the really weird traits about Rorikstead, so I won't get too into it, but to give you the cliff notes, it's supposedly named after the current leader, Rorik, yet has references going back to the First and Second Era. The land is reportedly hard to farm, yet their farms are booming, while the resident magic man gets really defensive if you ask him how they managed to do that, while also being very secretive about teaching one of the local children magic. And even Rorik seems to notice how unnatural the growth around here is. There's also a nearby haunted farmstead, but that's Creation Club stuff, so probably best just to let that slide. I don't know all the theories and details about whatever strangeness is going on with Rorikstead, but I think it's safer to say you don't want any part of it. If nothing else, they provide Whiterun with a fair share of crops, even though 3 farms are right on its doorstep, suggesting that whatever black magic they're up to, it's well worth it. Nearby, kind of in the middle of nowhere, and I hope I'm not butchering this, is Jukar's Monument, commemorating an ancient battle. It's not much, true, but there's something about landmarks like this that I really like. It makes the world feel old in a way that isn't just another Nordic ruin. Like it feels like things happened between the mythic past that no one can remember and the present day where you as the Dragonborn are rewriting history and unraveling mysteries every other day by accident, because Akatosh thought it'd be funny to drop a part of himself down into the middle of all this nonsense. And yeah, I know this is an ancient monument and so it's probably from the same era as the Barrows, but unlike those Barrows, this feels more grounded. It's a bit hard to explain, but it's like the difference between walking around the ruins of a city and looking at artwork from that same city. One is the skeleton of what used to be, while the other was purposefully left behind by the people of that time for those who came later. Which we don't get a lot of in Skyrim, because the game is so focused on facilitating your own experience in the here and now. I don't know, I just thought it was neat. Between Rorikstead and Whiterun are the vast plains which the Hold are best known for. These rolling fields of amber are exceptionally beautiful, but don't let that distract you from the fact that wolves roam here regularly, and are always ready to hunt. And giants and their mammoths have so much control here that farmers regularly pay taxes to them rather than the Jarl. Just those taxes are in livestock rather than shiny rocks. Seeing as it's a lot easier to avoid them here than in the Pale though, I actually give them a pass. Giants don't go out of their way to bother people if they can help it, and it never hurts to respect the sentient catapults and their building-sized pets. At first glance, these long and lonely fields may seem devoid of anything important, and to be fair, a lot of the space is just that. But never forget, this is Tamriel and weird things just be spawning here. Like the LSD plant at Sleeping Tree Camp that for some reason people thought would be a good idea to start making juice out of. A headless horseman that leads people back to its grave to be promptly assaulted by skeletons. A hole in the ground that leads to a comically deep pit full of vampires and undead, a little bit of Forsworn leaking out from the Reach, because nowhere is safe from these people. Or, and this one's really confusing, the Lunar Forge. Yet another mystery forge in Whiterun that also bestows an esoteric enchantment onto weapons forged from it in the form of a lunar weapon. Which sounds like they'd be much better fit for the Silver Hand, considering who it is they're fighting on a regular basis. Heck, I'm sure both the vampires and Dawnguard would love these things for those exact same reasons. Don't you just love when Skyrim is riddled with cool things that have no bearing on anything? But enough whining. This wouldn't be a proper tour guide if I didn't do a little bit of speculation on where Whiterun could be going, right? And Whiterun is especially relevant for this, as the battle for Whiterun is the turning point for the whole Civil War. With the center in either army's hands, they get the ability to control where their armies march and the bountiful resources of the Hold. Especially the Stormcloaks who need and can best utilize both. Whiterun has so much going for it that short of 8 dragons attacking at once, it'll survive no matter what. So the real question is, how would the people of Whiterun react and how peaceful would it be under either regime? Whiterun's populace is a bit hard to tell which way they lean most. Rorikstead is probably Imperial based off Rorik being a Great War veteran and their proximity to the Reach and Solitude. Meanwhile, Riverwood is mostly Stormcloak if you really get a feel for them. Or the Blacksmith family is an exception, but a passive one. Ralof can run right by them and they aren't reporting anything. This sort of trend continues in the capital. After all, the feud between the Greymanes and the Battleborns is repeated ad nauseum in Whiterun. It's a little microcosm of Skyrim itself. Because of that, no matter who winds up in charge, some large part of the population will be unhappy. But I can admit that it'd be worse in the Stormcloak outcome for one reason. The absence of Balgruuf. I've said it before, I'm a filthy Stormcloak, but even I can't deny that it's hard to watch Balgruuf be forced out of Whiterun. I've got nothing against Vignar, and the Greymanes are definitely a fair choice to replace the prior ruling clan. But come on, it's Balgruuf. Guy was just trying to do his best with 2 demonic children and seemingly every divine in Daedra using his city as the staging ground for one practical joke after another. And yet he took charge and kept his people safe. He sent troops to fight a dragon, defend Riverwood in case of one, and had the absolute mammoth-sized stones to tell Ulfric, a guy who can literally talk you to death, to shove it, and then backed it up by suiting up and throwing hands personally. If the Empire's in charge, plenty will be annoyed or even emboldened to violence, but Balgruuf's a person they can trust and who has a steady hand over them. Meanwhile, there's Vignar, who, though experienced and has arguably older ties to the city than Balgruuf does, is a bit more volatile. I mean, at least his family isn't 50% atrocious little monsters. They might be in on the werewolf thing, though I hadn't considered that until just now. I truly wish there was a way to keep him around in the Stormcloak ending, and if you told me you sided with the Empire just for him, I wouldn't even blame you. Remember, if you're making it to the Cloud District very often, give your regards to old Balgruuf, if he's still there. The man deserves some recognition. Whiterun is a pretty great place, and at least some of that is thanks to him. I've been here for 3 minutes and I've already lost all feeling in my toes. The area is foggy and hard to traverse. I'm pretty sure I'm being followed by a giant spider, and I know for a fact that vampires have a blood feud with the crappiest little city this side of the throat of the world. Whoever is preying on the downfall of Morthal, please, stop. You've already won. Well, 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 looky here, I wonder what... Actually, no. No, I'm not even going to bother. Not even gonna try some cheeky intro where I pretend things are fine. We all know what this place is about, and if you don't know because I'm calling it Hjalmarch, just change that word to Morthal and I'm sure we'll all agree quickly. Like, how is it possible to look at Winterhold, Dawnstar, and Falkreath and be envious? I don't even like Winterhold as much as Hjalmarch, but that's because Winterhold has so little to do. You have things to do in Hjalmarch, and they're primarily awful. And besides that, there's nothing else. The place is so cold and soggy that it might as well be Britain. No, that's not fair to it. I shouldn't be so mean. At least Morthal has the decency to be small. Hello. I am the Hearth Guy. Unhappily yours as I trudge my way through the final few holds of Skyrim. Today it's Hjalmarch, the region governed by Morthal, the slim, unwanted in-between of Solitude, the Pale, and Whiterun, that just can't seem to disappear like almost everyone wishes it would. Managing to be poorer than Winterhold, without any of the supernatural disasters making it be like that. It's an all-natural failure, taking on all the worst aspects of its neighbors and populated only in the places that aren't worth it. Hjalmarch is, if it was real, a masterclass proof that people should not be trusted to make their own decisions. because whoever took a look at this and decided to stick around clearly can't make rational choices. This place sucks so hard I don't even blame the secret cabal of vampires who are out to get the populace. At least they have the dignity to live somewhere with more than a wooden door between them and the freezing cold. But why don't we get started already? Yeah? The sooner we're into it, the sooner we get out of it. The land of Hjalmarch is so named for the Hjal River, which flows northward into the Sea of Ghosts and splits off into a cold, salty delta which dominates the Hold's environment. The southeast and eastern fringe of the Hold are icy and rugged, while the south and southwest feature the only decent terrain to live in the region. These traits separate and isolate Hjalmarch from its neighbors, despite being right next to the provincial capital. Of course, the north of the Hold is entirely abandoned, so I doubt it'd matter if they tried. The only person who could even dare to live up there is, well, you, if you purchase the Winstad Manor as Thane of Morthal. A little bit more on that later. The history of Morthal is fittingly sparse, with the least locations of any hold even behind Winterhold. Hjalmarch's environment simply repelled any sensible people, and so it's no wonder half the place has been surrendered to the marshes without a fight. The ground is no doubt too soft to build much on, it's too cold to farm decent crops, and it's infested with so many spiders and otherwise poisonous plants that Australia is fixing to sue it for copyright infringement. There is one location, however, with considerable importance. Labyrinthian, a titanic ruin with likely deep significance for the ancient dragon cult, seeing as a dragon is buried alongside with the dragon priest Marokai, plus its ties to an unseen ancient location called Bromshinar. The history of the place isn't super clear, and it's honestly not that relevant to the history of Hjalmarch itself. It was likely abandoned following the collapse of the dragon cult anyhow, and today it's only relevant in that it houses the staff of Magnus, and blocks off a potential trade route between Hjalmarch and Whiterun Hold, which could have been beneficial for the former. But unless someone wants to direct the companions or some other group of fight-hungry warriors at the place, they'll have to wait until the Dragonborn goes and erases all hostile enemies in Skyrim before the ruins will be safe enough to cross. Even then, superstition could hold them back. The few people who live in Morthal tend to be superstitious on the best of days, assuming a mage is evil because magic, thinking a burnt-down house is cursed and so they don't investigate it, and believing ghosts and monsters dwell in the marshes. Unfortunately for all of us, they're right. Falion isn't evil, but he certainly had experience with meddling in the dark arts. That house was burnt down due to the influences of a local vampire, and a child who died in that house haunts said house while her burnt corpse is buried out in the back. I guess it isn't superstition if they're correct, but it doesn't count. They didn't actually know any of that was true. These things and more make the city of Morthal an interesting place to settle down. Besides that, nearly half the town lives in the Jarl's Longhouse, High Moon Hall. The remaining villagers live their life centered around the city mill. The wood processed here is Morthal's only real export or contribution to the Imperial war machine that they've been supporting since the start of the game. Sure, they could sell ingredients, I guess, and they do boast 2 specialists in that field, what with Valian and the local apothecary, but that's not really a field you can easily capitalize on in a setting like this. I don't see anyone in Morthal setting up a greenhouse is all I'm saying. Besides, most of these plants are poisonous, so it might give them an even more dubious reputation. Aside from those 2 places, the rest are obligatory things like the tavern, which is operated by one person and houses a bard so bad that the Dark Brotherhood had to basically hold a raffle to see whose hit on the guy would be taken. Or the guard station, which doesn't have a captain of the guard as far as I can see, but it does have Benor. Benor's just sort of here. He's not a guard, and he'll leave as your companion if you beat him in a fight, but otherwise his hobby is just helping the Morthal guards. Morthal is ruled by Idgrod Ravencrone, an old woman with the gift of divination, whose reclusive personality, age, and reliance on her visions leads her people to distrusting her, which is understandable, but honestly, she's far from a bad ruler, just a bit too passive at such a pivotal time in Skyrim and Morthal for that matter. She only sides with the Empire due to proximity to Solitude and a vague aligning of goals. She's not a diehard supporter of them by any means. Push comes to shove, she will choose Morthal. It's just that with the visions and all, I can't blame anyone for assuming she's just a crazy old woman. The sentiment doesn't stop with the townsfolk, as her own housecarl Gorm has wanted to have her removed for these same reasons and was trying to convince Captain Aldous in Solitude. Unfortunately for Gorm, with the Civil War, that's not possible anymore. Don't let this seem like Idgrod's got no control, however, as she's completely aware of Gorm's plot. She has simply chosen not to interfere, which is either another example of her passivity or a sign of restraint. Whatever way you want to label it, better not to assume Idgrod's completely lost it. Also better not to assume she's more insightful than she is because, well, a lot goes on in Morthal that she probably should be concerned about. First and most probably mundane is that Phalion is performing strange magics out in the swamp. And while this never comes to anything, it's apparently concerning enough that if you tell her about it, then she will personally walk over to wherever Phalion is just to tell him to knock it off. Admittedly, this happens with the Stormcloak Jarl too, but come on, she needs a win. The other, far more concerning issue is, as I've mentioned several times now because it's the only significant event in this place, the vampire problem. Movarth, a master vampire who's been harassing the region for centuries, is plotting to take over the town through his agent Alva. She gets a man to burn down his own home with his family inside, converts a local woman into a vampire, and does all this within like 500 feet at most from the Jarl's own house. She could have looked out the window and probably figured half of this out. The long and short of it is that you sneak around for maybe a day and unravel this whole operation before hunting down a vampire and killing Alva's entire crew. But none of it could have happened unless the Dragonborn went and involved themselves like they tend to do. I know, it's how the game goes, but it doesn't help with the already present concerns about Idgrod's capabilities. Moving on from Morthal, we quickly start losing places to talk about. Only 3 locations in the hold bear any mention, so watch me milk as much out of them as I can. For starters, Stone Hills, once a large mining town, it's been reduced to a single building and a workers' camp around the mine. There are remnants of a wall, but that's probably just the road barriers. Stonehill here provides the other export that Morthal relies on. Kind of. Technically, it's operated by Sorley the Builder, whose family has led the settlement from way back when it was an actual town. But the mine is owned by Bryling over in Solitude. A bit odd when the mine's as old as it is, but it's probably just that the owners sold it to Bryling or her predecessor as the town shrunk in order to stave off collapse. Which, certainly grates on Sorley here. Her family and the town were once a lot more important than they are now, so she's got ambitions aplenty from these unsatisfactory conditions. Ambitions that can be met, to a degree, should you assist the Stormcloaks, as Sorley will be the one elevated to Jarl when Idgrod gets shunted out. And, yeah, not gonna lie to you, it really isn't that big of a difference. Idgrod did nothing and made her people think she was senile, and Sorley outright admits that she thinks of Morthal as a stepping stone to her becoming a Jarl of a larger hold, which I don't think that's how that works. I mean, sure, they replaced folks in the Civil War, but I don't think Jarls just casually replace each other, right? I also assume that with her becoming Jarl that the mine no longer belongs to Bryling, right? Maybe? Seems like a weird series of events. Like maybe you take Morthal for the Stormcloaks and Solitude is still Imperial. Do you mean to tell me that Bryling will own a mine in enemy territory that is operated by a ruling family of the now annexed hold? Something doesn't feel right here, but literally no one in Stonehills can be spoken to besides Sorley's husband, so I guess it doesn't matter. Also, fun fact, Sorley's housecarl is Argonian. Besides being the only Argonian to have that title, I think he's also the only non-human besides Irleth to be a housecarl, and he's a Stormcloak housecarl. I know I defend the Stormcloaks a lot, but even I have to admit that just feels weird. If Sorley wasn't so focused on herself, she might consider putting work into Stonehills. It's got a better location than Morthal. It's right on a main road, and it isn't halfway into a swamp, so even if it doesn't replace Morthal, it's just smart to put effort into building it up so you can exert more control over what little Hjalmarch you can. This is admittedly more of an issue in the eastern region of the hold, since the western is within the scope of Fort Snowhawk, which is actually comfortably within sight of the capital. A first for these smaller holds. If it didn't default start with necromancers, then I could have had something nice to say about Morthal. If nothing else, when it actually gets military posted there, it'll be a heavily fortified location. I'm pretty sure there winds up being more soldiers in Hjalmarch than normal civilians after the Civil War quest associated with it, which, that's just perfect, isn't it? Hjalmarch, most of the people here are forced to be here. Snowhawk used to be a larger settlement like Stonehills, but as the hold became poorer, I can only assume people either left for Morthal or for greener pastures. Said greener pastures being like a 5-minute walk to the left. See, the southern border of Hjalmarch and a bit of the southwest are actually not that bad. They're much closer to the regions of Whiterun and Hofengar, so of course nobody lives down here except bandits and a single fisherman who's probably wondering why no one is around. I think the only real problem is the presence of bandits and wolves, but those are literally everywhere in Skyrim. They have to be better than the mastiff-sized spiders that these freaks normally deal with. How has no one built a house down here at least? Sorry, some of my Fire Emblem Fates fight or flight response kicked in there. Last and sort of least is Winstad Manor, only really an honorable mention since the stretch of land is only a bit better than where Morthal actually is. It's right across from Solitude, so it might as well be in Hofengar, but the land is good and presumably the Nordic barrows around the place aren't going to spit the Draugr at anyone who happens to be nearby. Whether the Dragonborn does it or someone else, it could be a decent spot to settle down and make a life away from Morthal. With all the populated land out of the way, how about a quick look at the unpopulated land, as we ask the question of where, literally anywhere you might want to visit in Hjalmarch that isn't where people are. To start, the icy coast of the north. It isn't that different from how it is in the Pale or Winterhold, so if you want to get in some ocean sites, then it's as good as anywhere else. But you can get those views from the other side of the river near Solitude, so it's a moot point really. Same story for a lot of the marshes. You can just walk on the temperate side and see everything you might see in Hjalmarch without needing to actually stand in it. The Skyborn range of mountains can get you a nice view if you can avoid Labyrinthian's roaming trolls and the two dragons hanging out there, since, they're being themselves nowadays rather than dead where they belong. Not as big a deal if you ask me, since dragon perches are usually easy to spot and Labyrinthian is, well, Labyrinthian. I'd more blame you if you managed to miss it. Then there's the aforementioned temperate region to the southwest. And that's it. The rest of Hjalmarch is swamplands, and you already know how I feel about them. So let's pull a little thought experiment like I usually do. See, in spite of all my complaints, Morthal is steady enough as it is to keep going without a problem. Unlike Winterhold or the Pale, its proximity to Solitude and general unimportance leaves it without as heavy a burden as the other lesser holds. And since the lot of the Morthal citizens doesn't change as much no matter who is in charge, there's only one question that can be asked about the place. If Morthal could be more important, why and how would it change? Because I don't actually think it's impossible. Morthal has a few things that could, and major emphasis on could, push it to being valuable. One is potentially exerting control over the same bay that Solitude does. We forget that most of the river that flows out into the Sea of Ghosts is in Hjalmarch. Solitude only controls a slim stretch of it near the mouth. Plop down some form of settlement or outpost and then start finding a way to ferry smaller boats deeper through the swamps past Solitude, and Morthal could develop a way to be more relevant. Because think about what that one river connects to. Its tributaries connect to every inch of Hjalmarch, halfway through Whiterun Hold and all across the Reach. You couldn't be using full ships, of course, but smaller ferries or boats designed for river travel could make those trips, and Morthal could make itself the place where those smaller boats dock, rather than sharing space with the larger ships of Solitude. Do that, and suddenly the wood and ore that the hold produces could reach further. That wood especially might be useful for anyone in the Reach. Sure, they'd have to avoid Forsworn, but that's a given. It'd also make the shipping of goods into parts of Skyrim easier without relying on couriers traveling by foot. Both these things could make Morthal, Stonehills, and Snowhawk all become more important and worth the resources put in. Also helps that Morthal has the canonically lowest taxes in Skyrim. Is it because they're poor? Maybe, but low taxes are still low taxes. If all else fails, the tried and true "come here, we won't tax you as much" bid could work. I also think that if they put some effort into putting literally anything as far as farmland goes in the southwest of the Hold, then they'd be doing far better. Put it next to the river and combine with what I said before, and it wouldn't even matter if it was far away from Morthal, because they could easily get it back there. The swamps are bad, but the frostbite spiders can't swim, and slaughterfish can't capsize boats. I think. Even if they don't connect to the rest of Skyrim, I feel like if they just put effort into finding an easier way around Hjalmarch, then the locals wouldn't be so afraid and could more easily master the marsh that they call home. If they didn't shut themselves away and choose to ignore the lot they've been given, Morthal could be much more than what it is. But maybe that's wishful thinking. Perhaps the people of Morthal are doomed to be just as cold and harsh to their home as their home is to them, forever fighting it rather than finding a way to live with it. Okay, let me get this straight. This is the capital of Skyrim, right? Head of the whole thing. The center of Imperial control and culture, easily the richest population in the province. In that case, allow me to ask a very fair question. Why? Why is it so small? Why is half of it uninhabited? Why does the Thalmor basically run half of it? And why does no one do anything about the obviously evil castle full of vampires? You plan to have a random guard deal with what turns out to be the attempted resurrection of one of the greatest necromancers in history, meanwhile the ominous castle within sight of the elvish supremacists somehow just exists without conflict? How do any boats get into Solitude without noticing this? Ugh, it's gonna give me conniptions. Lovely place, huh? Want to see something else cool? Yeah. That's what happens when you open a door around here. Okay, fine. I know there's more to it. Just let me be salty. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, chat. I'm fighting it. I'm fighting the inborn urge to start shouting about the mongrel dogs of the Empire so much that it'd make Dagoth weep godly tears and make all of you think Ulfric is a moderate. But I won't. Yet. I promise you to remain as neutral as can be whilst discussing the heart and home of Imperial control here in Skyrim. Haafingar, the crown of Skyrim and the home of the province's legion, where the great capital of Solitude has stood for almost as long as Nords have called this place home. Everything important about it tends to be tightly packed around the capital, while the rest of Haafingar is lacking in population. We have Dragonbridge, sure, but every other location with non-criminal people are either Castle Volkihar or Thalmor outposts, and one of those don't count as people and the other are vampires. You'd think being smaller would make it feel more densely populated with stuff, but the hold consists of just 2 roads and a third of all locations are caves. Not much going on there for being Skyrim's capital. Even so, we have a story to tell and a hold to see, so let's get right into it. Haafingar's history as a hold of Skyrim begins with the founding of Solitude in the early First Era. Built into the base of the Great Arch as a windbreaker. The locals were a pious bunch, which carries over to the Temple of the Divines located even today. Besides the first settlement, Castle Dower was built into the arch and became the basis for Solitude's growth. It rapidly became a center of culture and regional power, already a prominent part of the province whenever it was made into a formal kingdom, and part of the First Empire. By this point, the Blue Palace had also been built and become the seat of Haafingar's rulers. Within this same, somewhat dubious time span, the Bard's College was founded to formally teach and record Nordic history, and educate future generations. Just in time for the War of Succession and Olaf One-Eye to come beat their heads in for denying his claim to the throne of High King. Solitude didn't take too kindly to that, and to show their formal protest, they started the tradition of the burning of Olaf. It's a festival where they light the effigy of old Olaf on fire, and they've been doing it for longer than any empire or other long-standing kingdom has lasted. So safe to say they really didn't like Olaf. From then on, Solitude, like most of Skyrim, had a bad habit of getting attacked, invaded, messed with by some Daedra or such, but most of that's Elder Scrolls Online stuff, and I don't have the time to get into that. Besides, none of that existed before Skyrim was made, so it's hardly relevant. Things pick back up in the Third Era with the rule of the Wolf Queen Potema, a necromancer and witch who tried to scheme her way into power repeatedly. Eventually, after one of her plans failed and she was banished from the Imperial City, she raised up a rebellion against the Emperor of the time and kicked off the War of the Red Diamond. This awful little bit of Imperial history saw her son Uriel, no, not that one, becoming Emperor for a while before he got killed and Potema got trapped in Solitude under siege. She died during the siege, but rumors and legends of her spirit haunting the Blue Palace persisted, especially since the next occupant of the palace, Pelagius III, would go on to become known as Pelagius the Mad. But a lot more focus would be put onto Solitude since Pelagius was next in line for the imperial throne, and this would probably be where the Empire's influence in Solitude would pick back up following the decline brought on by Potema. And that influence would only escalate from then on to the modern day. Solitude would again be more background noise than anything else until we hit the Fourth Era, and the events of Skyrim. It's here that the powder keg that was the Civil War finally went off as Ulfric Stormcloak challenged the High King Torrig to a duel and killed him. Arguments abound about how justified that was, but I've already talked about those at length elsewhere. Instead, for Solitude, the Imperial Legion's presence expanded rapidly as the Civil War began in earnest. General Tullius was called in to lead the region's offensive, and he became the true ruler of the city. Elisif may be the Jarl, but she has no authority that Tullius doesn't allow. Which doesn't really affect her, since Elisif spends most of her day playing at being Jarl, while Falk Firebeard and the rest of her court do her job for her. She's not really built for leadership, which makes sense since she originally was just married to Torrig, the original Jarl of Solitude and High King. She even bans the burning of Olaf tradition, which has gone on for ages because of the recent death of her husband. Which, I get it, but this is the kind of thing that brings people together, and she's too focused on trying to live up to a role she was never supposed to have, while also mourning her husband that she's sort of forgotten that she's in charge of the people's welfare too. Solitude's on the edge and split between the out-of-touch elites, the tense common people, and the authority of the Legion, which seems a bit too preoccupied with the war sometimes. You would think the center of Legion power wouldn't have to rely on the Dragonborn being the Dragonborn to handle some of the problems around here, but sometimes that's just how it goes. Solitude is split between two general districts, 3 if you count Castle Dower. The first is the Well or Market District, at the entrance of the city, which is the commercial center of Solitude. The Avenue District, meanwhile, has residential housing, the Hall of the Dead, the Bard's College, and the Blue Palace perched on the far end of the Stone Arch. This layout, besides centering all roads on the Blue Palace, such that they all lead to there, makes Solitude hard to siege. Every road is a potential kill zone with high walls around it able to be manned by archers or mages, and since Castle Dower can slam shut its gates, then you're forced to try and break through under constant fire, or try to wade through no doubt countless enemies to get to the Blue Palace. And its elevation makes simply sieging it even harder, as good luck getting a siege tower or something of that sort up the hill to the gates. At that point, you're fighting gravity as much as the Imperials. Unless you're Ulfric Stormcloak, of course, who just casually walks in at the end of the Civil War quest line. Considering how mad they got at a guy who didn't shut the gates, why they didn't lock the door is anyone's guess. On that note, really sets the mood whenever you have the executioner's block right as you enter the city. Ignore the fact that you actually watch an execution first thing upon getting here. What other reason could they have for putting that right there? It's not the center of the city, it's the gate. That sends a message to whoever walks through the front door that disobedience is not tolerated. It's also right across the street from the tavern, which... okay, historically speaking, that's kind of accurate. We forget that until the late 1800s we were still watching public executions as a pastime. Solitude's no stranger to luxury, of course, as places like Radiant Raiment would seem out of place in almost any other city. Having a direct line to the Empire and High Rock through its docks makes it both exceptionally comfortable, as well as exceptionally expensive. The Solitude House, Proudspire Manor, is the most expensive in the province, and Elisif boasts a far more robust and active court than any other Jarl, which means a larger elite class influencing the Jarl over the layperson. Of course, even if Elisif was more in touch with her people, I would bet that she'd actually be more frivolous. Compared to Windhelm, it's almost as if the locals of Solitude are doing everything in their power to forget the civil war is going on, content to be far away from the action with their defended position, and having a guarded front thanks to Hjalmarch. The people of Windhelm struggled daily from their Jarl's eyes turned towards the war, while Solitude's populace is concerned about a festival being postponed or a fancy wedding going on. Not to say everyone is ignoring the war. Again, we open up on a guy being turned into an example, but the movers and shakers of the city at least are pretty disconnected from it all, since Tullius and the Legion are handling it themselves. Solitude is an expansive area, however, and it doesn't just include the city itself. Katla's Farm, the Solitude Sawmill, and the Solitude Docks, which themselves have a subsection for the East Empire Company, are all technically a part of Solitude. You could probably also include the nearby lighthouse as a part of that, making Solitude's effective borders only rivaled by Whiterun's. The farm and the mill are self-explanatory. They provide direct supplies and goods to Solitude and the docks, which is valuable as things stand, with the ocean being the only viable way to reach Skyrim until the Pale Pass clears up. This means that the docks are the biggest lifeline to the capital, and since the Stormcloaks have somewhere between Jack and all in terms of naval power, it isn't a liability or point of weakness. This does lead to the noticeable problem of corruption within the East Empire Company, and the rampant activities of pirates, smugglers, and general thieves. So much money flows in and out that a lot gets stuffed into illegal pockets, and the person in charge of a lot of it, Vittoria Vici, cousin to the Emperor Titus Mede II, is so busy planning her aforementioned wedding that things start slipping between the cracks. Or she's, dead. My bad. I just really wanted to see my man, Lucien Lachan, when he learns how to stop talking. This does lead into another problem with Solitude. The sheer number of tragedies that occur here. The death of Torig in the beginning of the Civil War, the resurrection of Potema, the assassination of Vittoria and later the Emperor, the presence of Sheogorath casually haunting a wing of the Blue Palace. Solitude is just as much a magnet for violence and madness as it's ever been. Living in Solitude is practically asking for some supernatural or world-ending event to knock down your wall because the Divines and/or Daedra were feeling a bit bored that day. And if you want to enjoy the benefits of Hofengar without the drama of Solitude, you have one option. Dragonbridge. A milling town on the border of the hold next to the titular bridge. It's a humble place, really, but has space for improvement. The tavern and mill provide ample money for the area due to the road being the only real way to get to Solitude unless you want to try wading through Hjalmarch, and the Lilviev family farm produces food for local use in the inn and commercial use up in Solitude's markets. All in all, a stable place with room to move into, especially since the Penitus Oculatus outpost is temporary. Once the Emperor is out of Skyrim, or this side of Oblivion, it'll be emptied out. At least in the lore. Unless you have a mod installed, they won't go anywhere. Still, not a bad place to live, and unlike most settlements, it actually has the space and possibly the need. A place like this, with how much traffic passes through it, is in a prime position to grow in response. Might have to if Solitude ever loses a need for the mill, either because it can rely on the closer one or its demand lessens. Something to consider. And besides Dragonbridge, good luck. See, one of Hofengar's weirdest traits is how it's laid out. Split along the Kilcreath Mountains, hey there Meridia, as trauma-inducing as ever I see. The hold has two extremes. The snowy north side and the temperate south. The south encompasses everything I've already discussed, and you can pretty much see all of it just by following the road between Dragon's Bridge and Solitude. The north side, meanwhile, is larger but completely devoid of settlements by anyone that I would consider an actual person. In other words, the only people here are bandits, vampires, and Thalmor. Bandits attack on sight, vampires are an insult to the natural order, and Thalmor are the worst. Some part of me desperately hopes that the Imperials purposefully had the Thalmor build their two major outposts up there just to spite them, because if so, I would gain so much more respect for them. The Embassy, headquarters of the Knife Ears in Skyrim, and Northwatch Keep, which is just a Thalmor gulag, are initially the only source of authority in northern Hofengar. Over the course of either side's Civil War quest, Fort Frogstad gets occupied, but otherwise 2/3 of the hold might as well be in the Somerset Isles. Or Castlevania, because, yeah, Castle Valkahar is here to make us wish the sun was out 24/7. They've admittedly kept themselves on the down low in the past, and with the return of the Dawn Guard, the chances of them being exterminated like they deserve suddenly increases. But you'd be naive to think that over the centuries they've been hanging around here, they haven't gone out of their way to ruin this already pretty awful corner of Skyrim. The only upside is that there is a non-zero chance that at least one Thalmor has been killed by a vampire, and that alone forgives any evils, real or imagined, that Harkon's glorified fraternity may have committed. Although, alternatively, that means there's a real chance there's a Thalmor vampire out there because of that. But seeing as Pelennor Whitestrake hasn't manifested in the Fourth Era exclusively to kill that one insult to all things holy, I'm assuming that hasn't happened yet. The Dawn Guard will probably kill them all anyway. I'd be surprised if the canon outcome of that DLC was the Dragonborn choosing to help the filthy human leeches. Even if they do, at least Serana gets put in charge. A small win, but a win nonetheless. We take those. As for any natural sights, the coast and ocean views are nice, but everything else you may want to see you can see from the main south road. I suppose the Temple of Meridia is impressive, and it's neat that it's allowed to stay without problem. No one really likes undead, I guess, and Meridia is a usually good-aligned Daedra. Begs the question why she never did anything about the vampires on her doorstep, but the less I hear her voice, the better.
A new hand touch.
Obviously, Hafengar is kind of sparse due to how it's designed, and mostly leaves us with little to talk about. I don't even have that much to say in regard to the Civil War questline. The immediate future of the Hold looks the same if the Imperials win. Things return to business as usual, and Elisif becoming the High Queen would just mean her getting a new hat that doesn't mean anything, because the Imperials would be carrying all the slack anyway. The Thalmor would probably grow in influence to a degree, but more Imperial resources would also be able to get allocated to keeping them in check in the unsettled parts of Hafengar. Heck, even if the Emperor dies here, all that'd do is tarnish the Penitus Oculatus and make the Legion increase their security in case anybody tries the same with Elisif. Everything else would be the same. Things do get interesting under Stormcloak occupation. Elisif stays the Jarl, but the focus of the entire political scene shifts dramatically. Windhelm and the original Stormcloak Hold suddenly become the center of Skyrim's power. Solitude may enjoy luxury for its great port, but where the jagged crown goes, so goes the purse strings. It'd also likely have its territory drowned in Stormcloak soldiers eager to root out the last of Imperial presence and hunt down the Thalmor in the north. Once they control Hrogstad, whose central position gives them reach over the Embassy, Northwatch, and Dragonbridge, then nowhere in the old capital will be safe for either of the Stormcloak's enemies. After a purge like that, Solitude could find itself struggling to get back on its feet. They went from the provincial capital to the symbol of the new government's defeated enemy. I also suspect Solitude would be hard to tame in the early days. It may be small, but there are plenty of caves and older structures for enemies to hide out in if they had to. Solitude held a grudge against Olaf One-Eye long enough to make a tradition about burning his effigy. Forgive and forget doesn't seem to be in their playbook. Although, in that case, maybe we could see people move away from Solitude in the wake of the siege and battle, and start trying their luck in the north. A failure of the Imperial Army and local guards mixed with lackadaisical leadership and recent damage to the city could be a decent batch of reasons to pick up roots and try elsewhere. If the Stormcloaks clear out the Thalmor, then suddenly two locations with either decent proximity to Solitude or good defenses can open up. Also, Castle Volokar, if it's empty and someone feels like dealing with what has to be a lot of lingering Daedric influence. Food for thought. In the end, Solitude will bounce back no matter what. It's immensely valuable, has great infrastructure already present, and even a Stormcloak government would have to accept that centuries of Imperial influence aren't going to disappear because of one change in management. Whether in victory or defiance, the people of Solitude will doubtlessly hold their heads high until the very end. Or until the property prices finally crush them. It's finally time. The moment I've been waiting for with bated breath. A chance to talk about the Hold which holds the deepest, most beloved place in my heart. A place so utterly terrible, so spectacularly awful, divinely garbage, that it can only be considered the true pinnacle of what Skyrim has to offer. Come with me one last time into the Reach, so we can see how bad it can really get. Hear that? That's the sound of perfection. The screams of locals mixed with the rabid shouting of, well, the other locals. All as a city full of people who've apparently never heard of a mattress before go about their lives wondering whose idea it was to set up shop in the equivalent of dwarven Roanoke. Markarth, city of dreams, mostly the bad kind. Vermina, eat your heart out. Nothing you do could ever come close to the trauma just being in this city causes the population on a daily basis. Terrorist attacks every other day, exploitative labor in half the businesses, corruption that makes Maven Blackbriar take notes, and so much supernatural nonsense going on I half expect the College of Winterhold to move in just to find out if the people here somehow angered every divine at the same time. Hello, I am the Hearth Guy. Here with the final hold of our tour guide to Skyrim. 8 holds lie behind us, but I saved my favorite for the last. Why is it my favorite? Not because it's the best, that's for sure. It's all because of one simple word. Schadenfreude. There is a level of morbid fascination that comes from just watching how bad Markarth can get, which never ceases to amuse me. And I want to talk about all the ways Markarth does that here today. So strap in. This one's a doozy. We start with history right out the gate. Because to best get a grasp for Markarth's pathetic lot, we must examine all which has already happened. And boy does the Reach have a story to tell. Before it all, before even the Dwemer built their cities along and beneath the Druidoc Mountains which mark the landscape, the place we now call the Reach was occupied by scattered tribes of Needs, the proto-race of man who occupied Tamriel before the arrival of the Atmorans. The Needs are technically extinct, but their blood exists in just about every human race to some extent. Even from this beginning, the people here had a lot to deal with, from vampires hounding their ancient ancestors, to the Atmoran settling Skyrim. Specifically, when Olaf One-Eye first was conquering territory as a part of Skyrim, the first instance of a long line of the Reach being part of a greater Nordic state. They also had to share space with the Dwemer, who moved in around the same time, although they were probably less obtrusive considering their preference for building underground. There is an exception to every rule, however, as the Dwemer built one city in the region which would bask in the sunlight. A golden and stone fortress city at the far end of the mountains, partly built into the stone. Neshuan Zel to the Dwemer, and to the Reachmen, Markarth, the safest city in the Reach. We'll soon find out why that doesn't mean much. The Reach would remain mostly wild even under the Kingdom of Skyrim, and with the disappearance of the Dwemer in 700 of the First Era, Markarth was left abandoned. Recognizing prime real estate, the Reachmen walked in and set up in the ruins, although it was less a proper city again and more just occupied space. Fast forward a couple centuries and the First Empire would conquer the Reach and, for the first time, Markarth would officially be made into the capital of the region. Victory was assured for the Empire, but the Reachmen made them earn every inch of land, as the Rebellion of the Red Eagle hounded the Imperial forces for as long as their leader, Fowlin, lived. Fowlin would be a pivotal character in the story of the Reach and its people, as he was originally set to become the first true unifying king of the 10 tribes who called it home. But when the Empire came and Fowlin refused to yield, he was banished by the very elders who saw them as their future. Left alone in the wilderness, Fowlin would make a decision which, in my humble opinion, would doom his people for the rest of time. Because in those wilds, he met a Hagraven, and she offered him power in exchange for his heart, making him into the first Briarheart. As an empowered warrior of pure vengeance, Fowlin fought the Empire and began freeing his people, but slowly his own humanity disappeared. The endless hordes of the Empire would finally kill Fowlin, however, and he'd be buried in the rebels' cairn, with a final message to his people. That when the Reach was free, and his sword, the Red Eagle's fury, was returned to his tomb, he would rise again to lead the Reach as their king. Fowlin himself was a mixed bag, as far as heroes go, but it's his ties to the Hagravens which would forever mark his legacy. As time would go on, the Reachmen would further entrench themselves with these witches, and warp their society as a result. See, at first the Reachmen had a general spiritual religion based around nature spirits, or what they called Great Spirits. Primarily Hircine who, contrary to popular belief, isn't the worst Daedra to hitch yourself to. I'll be the first to admit it, if you had to choose one to get stuck with for an eternity, most Daedric princes would be worse than Hircine. Same is true for Periite. Sure, he'll give you a nasty illness or disease, but he'll also cure you of that same sort of disease. He's also a pretty level-headed person even when someone is rejecting his offers. Unlike other Daedric princes, every conversation with him doesn't feel like a hostage negotiation. If only it ended with those two. Sadly, besides sometimes worshipping Hagravens themselves, which is bad enough to make my inner companion get twitchy, they also like to worship the likes of, Molag Bal, Maroons Dagon, Namira, Malakath, and Nocturnal. The Aedra have some presence in their beliefs, but it's much lighter and hardly matters when the Hagravens have tied themselves so closely to Reachman society, which would be a constant from Fowlin's days onward, only growing as time passed. The Reach would keep sporadically trading hands between being independent to being ruled by human empires through the next 1,000 years or so. During that funny period between the fall of the Second Empire and the rise of the Third, one guy in the Reach had a very crazy idea, possibly spurred on by the fact that he had witches as advisors. What if we did the invading this time? And so, as I mentioned back in the Falkreath video, some Reachmen decided that taking over Cyrodiil was a great way to spend an afternoon, and for about 100 years we had the Longhouse Emperors. While this was hectic and no doubt stress-inducing for everyone else, Markarth and the Reach understandably flourished with Reachmen in control of the continent's heartland. This pushed Markarth and the Reach forward, strengthening the independent kingdom that would rise after the Longhouse Emperors were overthrown. Just in time for Tiber Septim to return the favor when he figured conquering the Reach was a great way to start his spree of unifying Tamriel. On the bright side, the region was pretty peaceful during the Third Empire's reign. The Reachmen were still present and probably causing problems regularly enough, but the Third Era saw the territory do well for itself. Then everyone's favorite knife-ears did what they do best and made the world significantly worse. During the Great War, disgruntled Reachmen saw the opportunity to seize power and took it, forming what we now call the Forsworn. With so little military in the hold by that point, they easily took Markarth and began a 2-year period of rule. Accounts vary, as you would expect, about how peaceful this all was. Putting aside the works of Arianus Arius, an in-lore propagandist for the Empire, which isn't even a debate, he just straight up is, the kingdom that would follow was chaotic, to say the least. And the Nords forced to live under this didn't appreciate their Reachman king, Madanach. Which brings us to the final event on this timeline, the Markarth incident. With few options, the Jarl of the city and his son Igmund turned to the recently returned war hero Ulfric Stormcloak, the at the time heir of Windhelm, to push out the Forsworn in exchange for reinstating Talos worship. Ulfric complied and would give the world a taste of what an angry person with the power to shout can do several years before the Dragonborn would be doing that daily. Ulfric pretty effortlessly broke up the Forsworn forces and captured Madanach, before handing control of the city back to the Jarl. This is the part where things get messy. Jarl Hrolfdir's early days back in charge would be, at least according to the Forsworn, utterly brutal, as he sought to punish those responsible. I'll admit that the accounts come from biased sources, but based on how Hrolfdir acted during this whole event, I'm not inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt. Hrolfdir promised Ulfric and his men something he could not give them, and then imprisoned him for doing what Hrolfdir asked him to. And then he allowed Madanach to live at the insistence of Thonar Silverblood, who wanted to use Madanach's influence as a pawn. Oh, also, Markarth has its own absurdly wealthy family called the Silverbloods. Real colorful bunch, them, but we'll get to that. In short, I choose to blame Hrolfdir for every negative outcome from the Markarth incidents because, hoo boy, did he fumble that one. His son, Igmund, still has to put up with Thalmor in the city because of the Markarth incident. Now, with that extensive background, we find Markarth as of the events of Skyrim, an ancient city so heavily scarred and under constant pressure from the corruption inside and the dangers outside. Which, of course, is what makes it so much fun. Look at this mess. The second you step inside, it's a free-for-all. Some dude trying to stab a woman in the streets, a vigilant of Stendars investigating a demon house, and the beds are made of stone. Hiding under this already scuffed surface is a conspiracy with the richest family in Markarth, and the leader of the local terrorist organization vying for power. While not one, not two, but 3 different Daedric princes are skulking around the Reach, with one of them having a cannibalistic cult whose members include several key members of the community. None of that is taking into account that Markarth is sitting on top of a much larger dwarven structure filled with Falmer, spiders, and dwarven automatons programmed to kill everything on sight. One wrong swing of a pickaxe down in Sidna Mine and the Forsworn would be the least of their problems. Markarth, as compared to all other major cities, is an exceptionally vertical place. Understandable for its location, but it helps the city be much larger in a much smaller space, and in turn be occupied by a much larger population than nearly any other capital. Understone Keep alone has enough people to fill out all the smaller settlements, and very nearly equals Winterhold's population. May not seem like a big accomplishment, but that's including the college. At the lowest end of Markarth, there is the Mine and the Warrens, both of which house the bottom rungs of Markarth society. Prisoners in Sidna Mine and the sick and poor in the Warrens, and often where the people who process the mine's ore live. This part of town, although humble, is the backbone of Markarth's economy, and the source of the Silverblood fortune, which is what makes their collusion with the Forsworn such a double-edged sword, since they can be found at every level, from the mine where they toil to the warrens where they process it, up into the treasury house and the record-keeping branches of this whole operation. This naturally comes crashing down during the events of the Forsworn conspiracy questline, where Modonok orchestrates an internal break from the Silverblood family, leaving over a dozen people dead and the King in Rags either dead himself or free to roam the Reach and unifying the outlying Forsworn cells. Again, more on that later. Next is the Central Hill, where we find the Market and Silverblood Inn, which belongs to exactly who you think. Not gonna lie, as much as I hate Maven Blackbriar, even she isn't as egregious as this. From the market up the hill is various residential streets with a few miscellaneous shops. The central spire of rock houses both the Temple of Talos and Dibella, albeit on different levels. The Temple of Talos is abandoned as per the White Gold Concordat, and Dibella's priestesses are doing Lord only knows what half the time. They're an order of women dedicated to a goddess who's just barely better than the Daedric Prince of Hedonism, so I'm not sure I want to know about their private life. The upper layers are mostly homes to the upper crust of society, and all of them have some connection to the Silverbloods, so I'd be repeating myself again. So let's leave it at that. And behind all of that is Understone Keep, the palace of the Jarl that could probably house the whole city itself if half of it wasn't dedicated to Calselmo's stupid museum. Is my hatred of this place purely because of how annoying it is to break into? Yes, how could you tell? Here Igmund or Thongvar Silverblood, if the Stormcloaks are in charge, govern Markarth and the Reach, in easily the most heavily defended keep in all of Skyrim. Dwarven craftsmanship is nothing to scoff at, and this whole place is built into the mountainside. Realistically, nothing short of the Thuum is breaking through these doors. Is it any wonder that it takes exceptional circumstances for anyone to take the city from whoever's ruling it? The Forsworn needed practically every soldier out of town, and the returning Jarl needed a guy who could literally verbally assault people to get it back. Markarth doesn't stop here, however, as its effective range extends to the nearby Left-Hand Mine and, arguably, Ulskeggr Mine further up the road. Although, since it's overrun with Forsworn at the start of the game, that's probably not the case. The moment you step past Left-Hand Mine and the Salvis Farm, good luck. Because if Ulskeggr Mine is any indication, once you're an inch past Markarth's reach, then you immediately go into the danger zone. Barring a few exceptions, every inch of the hold past there is filled with so many ways to kill you that you realize calling Markarth the safest city in the Reach is a very small achievement. Forsworn, sure, but Falmer are also a common problem due to the proximity of Dwarven ruins and the parts of Blackreach directly beneath the hold. It makes the glimmers of safety in this landscape of violence all the more remarkable. Most surprising is Karthwasten, far up the northeastern road away from Markarth. It has quite a few notable traits. Firstly, it's owned by a native Reachman, who I'm going to call Einthok, because I'm too lazy to look up a pronunciation and just look at that name. He's the closest thing to a noble that the Reach has outside the Jarl. As a Reachman owning land, both the local Nords and Forsworn expect the worst of him. But he's genuinely just a decent guy trying to make his way in the world with simple hard work. It doesn't protect him from harassment from Forsworn or the Silverblood family wanting his land, and as you can tell, there are no walls. Sometimes Forsworn will just outright kidnap people here. Happens to a girl from Karthwasten, and the only reason she gets saved is because she's Dibella's chosen one. The Shrine of Periite is out back too, which... honestly, that's just bad RNG, really. I talked him up, but Periite still has a non-zero chance of just infecting the whole town for some esoteric reason. Sucks to be Karthwasten. Sucks to be Einthok. Past Karthwasten, the only remaining human settlement not occupied by people who'd probably sacrifice you to a bird witch is the old Hralden Inn. Used to be a village here, but just the inn remains as a historical site. Tiber Septim, back when he was still Hjalti Halfbeard, fought and conquered the land Hralden now sits on, even supposedly staying in the very same inn. Beyond a ghost that appears and confirms this fact, nothing else is really of note here. The last pockets of civilization can be found in the far north and south of the Reach, Not human civilization, mind you, but orcish civilization. 2 of the 4 orc strongholds of Skyrim are located in the Reach. The Hrothgarian Mountains, which have long been home to orcs, connect and border the Druidoc Mountains that make up the Reach, so their presence here isn't all that shocking. Morkosgr is a fairly standard mining town, while Dushnikyal seems like the most well-off stronghold in Skyrim. They keep to themselves, like most strongholds, but at least a few have left and found lives outside their walls. A few orcs live and work in Markarth, and at least one in Dushnikyal served in the Legion. Still have to prove yourself to be allowed in, but at least in the Reach the chances of that happening are higher than elsewhere. And them being, well, orcs, seems to mean the Forsworn know better than to mess with them. And to be fair, they've been here nearly as long as they have. From there on, I wouldn't suggest looking for natural beauty or cool historical sites, because even if the regular Draugr aren't there to kill you, they're still going to be infested with Forsworn and Hagravens, and in only one instance is that a possibly good thing. Isn't that right, Melka?
Hater, chew your bone.
Love that crazy bird. There's also a large possibility that you take a wrong turn and get jumped by Falmer, which are somehow worse than the Hagravens. So if you aren't staying where people are, then you'd better not be staying in the Reach, period. Also, obligatory mention of dragons, but at this point, does it even matter? How much worse can they make this place? Well, funny you should mention that. Now, this is normally the part of the video where I discuss the ways I think the Reach could change and grow better. But why would I? Have you not been paying attention? I like when this place sucks. So just for a bit of fun today, we're having a different conversation. Today we're going to put on our thinking caps and figure out some ways to make this place worse. I just want to make this rocky garbage heap a noticeably worse place to live, and no, I don't care about the casualties. So how would I start making this place a steaming pile of crap? First, and I can't believe I'm saying this, we hand it over to the Stormcloaks. I know, you've heard me defend them this long, but come on. If the Stormcloaks are in charge here, then, akin to Maven and Riften, Thongvar Silverblood takes the throne, and unlike in Riften, there's an argument to be made that Igmund has ways to keep the family in check. Now the hold really belongs to him, and far fewer guardrails are in place to hold him back. Next, I'm going to immediately contradict myself about giving the Silverbloods more control and say that you next want to assist Modanok in escaping Sidna Mine. With them out in the hills and out from the thumb of Thonar Silverblood, the feud between Nord and Reachman is only going to escalate. And after the Civil War and Ulfric turning his eyes outward to the Thalmor, the chances of there being excess resources for the Forsworn would be slim to none. So you throw the now far more powerful Silverbloods against a far more unhinged and unified Forsworn and watch the fireworks. After that, assist the group of cannibals in murdering a priest so their heathen ways may continue unabated. And if you want to really push the envelope, help get the Silverbloods one of Karthwasten's mines. Just really help them become more all-encompassing, yeah? Realistically, the Reach isn't going to get much better no matter what you do. If you kill Modanok, the Silverbloods get more control in exchange for the Forsworn becoming more scattered. Leave Markarth in the hands of Igmund, and that's just the same ruler whose father lost the city to begin with. Markarth will just keep sliding downward until something breaks, or it'll fall into a general slump of apathy and violence. Personally, I wish we could see how it turns out, because no matter what happens, it will be entertainingly awful. With that wrapped up, we can consider every major nook and cranny of Skyrim sorted out, from the armies shaping history to the places shaped right beside them. If you enjoyed this series, consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. This will help you keep up to date with whatever I'm working on. Similarly, if you want to give extra support, then you can become a channel member or patron. Both get access to a private Discord and early content, so if you really want to, then I'd appreciate it. It's all optional, though, so no pressure. With that all said and done, I am the Hearth Guy, and I will see you next time around the hearth.